Hello everyone. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never thought I'd actually share this, but I need to get it off my chest. What happened to me last month at that cabin in Montana still keeps me up at night. I'm not usually the type to get spooked easily. I've done plenty of solo camping, and I've always been comfortable with solitude. But this was different. I found the rental listing online while looking for a quiet place to finish my novel. The price was surprisingly reasonable for a 2-week stay, especially given the size of the property. A 2-bedroom cabin on 15 acres of private land, backing up against national forest. The owner, Dave, seemed nice enough over email. Said he lived about 2 hours away and wouldn't be around during my stay, but left me with clear instructions and emergency contacts. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. Pure solitude, just me and my laptop surrounded by pine trees and mountain views. No cell service, but the cabin had satellite internet, so I could still research and email if needed. The closest neighbor was apparently 2 miles down the dirt road, and I hadn't seen a single car pass by since arriving. That changed on the 4th morning. I woke up early, around 6 a.m., and went to make coffee on the front porch like I'd been doing every day. That's when I noticed it. A small wooden chair like the kind you'd see in an elementary school classroom, sitting in the middle of the yard about 50 feet from the cabin. Just sitting there. At first I thought maybe it had been there all along and I somehow hadn't noticed, but no. I'd been working on that porch every day, looking out at that exact spot. That chair was definitely new. I walked out to examine it, thinking maybe a bear had dragged it from somewhere, though that made no sense. It was dusty but intact, and positioned to face directly toward my bedroom window. A chill ran down my spine when I noticed there were no drag marks in the dirt around it. Someone had carefully placed it there. I brought the chair inside and sent Dave an email asking if he'd stopped by or if any maintenance workers were scheduled. He replied pretty quickly saying no, he hadn't been by and nobody else should be on the property. He suggested maybe kids from nearby properties were playing pranks. I wasn't convinced. The closest properties were miles away, and this didn't feel like a teenage prank. That night I had trouble sleeping. Every little creak of the cabin made me jump. I kept getting up to check the windows, but between the darkness and my reflection in the glass, I couldn't see much. I finally dozed off around 3 a.m. The next morning, my heart nearly stopped. There was an old photograph lying in the gravel driveway about 30 feet closer to the cabin than where the chair had been. It showed a family standing in front of what looked like this very cabin, but the photo had to be from the 1960s based on their clothing. I didn't recognize any of the faces, but they were all smiling at the camera except for one girl, maybe 12 years old, who was staring directly to her left with an unsettling blank expression. I brought the photo inside with shaking hands and spent the next hour comparing it to the cabin. Same basic structure, though the current cabin had obviously been renovated. The trees in the background were much smaller in the photo. I emailed it to Dave, asking if he knew the family. No response this time. That night, I barely slept at all. I pushed a heavy dresser in front of my bedroom door and kept a flashlight and my hiking poles next to the bed. Every time I started drifting off, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps on the gravel outside. But when I'd shine the flashlight out the window, there was nothing there. The 3rd morning was when I seriously considered leaving. 20 feet from my front door was a small pile of children's toys, a rusty metal truck, a few dirty porcelain dolls with cracked faces, and a jump rope tied into a complex knot. They were arranged in a perfect circle, and in the center was a piece of paper with childish writing in pencil that said, "Do you want to play?" My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I took photos of everything with my phone. I spent the next few hours pacing the cabin, debating whether to pack up and leave. But something kept me there. Maybe curiosity, maybe pride, maybe plain stubbornness. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that this was clearly someone's idea of a sick joke. I tried to write but couldn't focus. Every few minutes I'd get up and check the windows. Around sunset, I swear I saw movement at the tree line, just a quick shadow darting between trunks. I tried telling myself it was a deer or elk, but deep down, I knew better. That night, the noises started. First, it was just the sound of something being dragged across the gravel. Slow, methodical scraping that would stop every few minutes. Then came the humming. A child's voice, too distant to make out the tune, but distinctly human. I sat in the dark living room, clutching my hiking poles, too terrified to look outside, but too paranoid not to listen. Around 2 a.m., something started tapping on the windows. Gentle at first, then more insistent. It moved from window to window, circling the cabin. I could see a vague shadow passing each time, but it was too dark to make out any details. The tapping was accompanied by giggling, but it didn't sound like a normal child's laugh. It was hollow, almost mechanical. When dawn finally came, I nearly screamed at what I found. 10 feet from my front door was a perfect circle of those small wooden chairs, 8 of them, all facing the cabin. In the center was a larger chair, and sitting on it was a porcelain doll wearing what looked like a hand-sewn dress made from the same fabric pattern as the girl's dress in that old photograph. I didn't pack. I didn't clean up. I grabbed my laptop, phone, and car keys, and I ran. I was in my car and down that dirt road before my brain could even process what I was doing. I called Dave once I had cell service again, and left a rambling voicemail about a family emergency, and mailed him the keys from the next town. He emailed me a few days later asking about the chairs, said there weren't any chairs when his cleaning service went to prepare for the next guest, said there was no sign of the toys or the doll either, just an old photograph lying on the kitchen counter showing a family in front of the cabin. He attached it to the email. It wasn't the same photo I found. This one was taken in the same spot, but it showed a different family, and in the background, barely visible in the cabin's window, was a pale face staring out. A girl, maybe 12 years old, with a blank expression. I still have both photos saved on my phone, but I can't bring myself to look at them. I've tried researching the cabin's history, but there's surprisingly little information available. Dave stopped responding to my emails after I asked about previous incidents or deaths on the property. Sometimes late at night I still hear that humming, even though I'm hundreds of miles away now. And last week, I found a small wooden chair sitting in my apartment complex's parking lot, facing my bedroom window. I'm moving next month. I don't know what was out there in those woods, or what it wanted, but I know it wasn't finished playing whatever game it had started. And sometimes I catch myself wondering if running away just made things worse. If now, instead of staying confined to that cabin, it's decided to follow me home. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last month on the late-night train from Boston to Providence. I've taken that route hundreds of times for work, but I've never been able to get back on a train since that night. I know this might sound crazy, but I need to share this with someone because it's eating me up inside. It was a Tuesday night, around 11:45 p.m. I had stayed late at the office to finish up some quarterly reports, and I was exhausted. The platform at South Station was practically empty. Just a few other tired commuters scattered around, all of us avoiding eye contact like typical late-night travelers. When the train pulled up, I grabbed my usual spot in the middle car, the one that usually has the best heating in winter. At first, everything was normal. I settled into my window seat, put my bag on the empty seat next to me, and pulled out my phone to check some emails. There were maybe 8 other people in my car, a couple of students with headphones on, what looked like a nurse in scrubs, and a few other professional types like me, all of us just wanting to get home. That's when I first noticed him. He was sitting at the very back of the car wearing a plain gray suit that somehow looked both expensive and worn out at the same time. Nothing particularly strange about him except something just felt off. You know that feeling when you're being watched? It was like that, but worse. Every time I glanced in his direction, he was completely still, staring straight ahead, hands folded in his lap, not even blinking. Just still. I tried to ignore him and focus on my phone, but I kept getting this nagging urge to look back. The third time I did, my stomach dropped. He was 4 rows closer. I hadn't heard or seen him move. He was just in a different seat. Same position, same blank stare, same folded hands. I blinked hard and looked again, thinking I must be more tired than I realized. The woman sitting across the aisle, the nurse, caught my eye. The look on her face told me she'd noticed it too. She gave me this slight shake of her head like she was trying to convince herself she was imagining things. I wanted to say something to her, but what do you say? Hey, are you also seeing the creepy guy teleporting around the train? I decided to keep my eyes forward, gripping my phone so tight my knuckles were white. The train swayed and rumbled as we passed through the darkness between stations. Every slight reflection in my window made my heart jump. I could feel him back there, that static presence. About 15 minutes into the ride, the overhead lights flickered, just for a second, barely noticeable. But when they stabilized, I heard the nurse make this small, gasping sound. Against my better judgment, I turned around. He was halfway up the car now, still in that exact same position, like someone had just picked him up and moved him like a mannequin. 6 rows away. The closest student had taken out his headphones and was now sitting completely rigid, staring straight ahead. Everyone in the car could feel it. This suffocating tension, like the air had gotten thick and heavy. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call someone. Police? Amtrak security? But I had no service. Of course I had no service. The nurse was gripping her bag like a shield, and I could see her trying to catch the attention of one of the students, but nobody wanted to be the first to acknowledge what was happening. Then the lights flickered again. This time they stayed off longer, maybe 3 seconds. In that darkness I heard something. Not footsteps, not movement. Just this soft, wet sound like someone slowly running their tongue over their lips. When the lights came back on, I couldn't help it. I looked. 3 rows behind me now. Close enough that I could see his face clearly for the first time. That's what still haunts me the most. His features were wrong. Like someone had described a human face to an AI, and it got everything just slightly incorrect. His eyes were a bit too far apart. His smile stretched just a fraction too wide, and his skin had this waxy quality that made him look almost artificial. But the worst part? His expression hadn't changed at all. That same blank stare, but now I could see his eyes weren't focusing on anything. They were just empty, like black marbles pushed into clay. The nurse stood up suddenly, grabbing her bag. "Back car," she said, her voice shaking. "We should..." The lights went out again. This time the darkness felt absolute. The kind of darkness that presses against your eyeballs. I could hear people moving, shuffling. Someone starting to cry. That wet sound again, closer now, and underneath it, a low hum that might have been human, but wasn't quite right. Like someone trying to remember how to make sounds with their throat. When the lights came back on, I screamed. He was in the seat right behind me. I could smell him, this sickly sweet odor like overripe fruit and wet leather. The nurse was gone. The students were gone. Everyone had fled to other cars while it was dark, and I was alone with him. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only sit there, feeling his presence inches behind my head. Then I heard it, this soft, precise whisper right next to my ear. "Your stop is next." It wasn't. My stop was still 20 minutes away. But right then the train started slowing down, that familiar screech of brakes even though we were in the middle of nowhere. No station in sight, just darkness outside the windows. The train came to a complete stop. The doors opened with their usual hiss and chime. "Your stop." The whisper came again, closer now, those wrong lips almost brushing my ear. I ran. I didn't think, didn't grab my bag, didn't look back. I just bolted out of that car and onto the empty platform that shouldn't have been there. The moment my feet hit the concrete, the doors closed behind me. As the train pulled away, I caught one last glimpse through the window. He was in my seat now, face pressed against the glass. That too wide smile stretched even wider. Those empty eyes locked onto mine until the train disappeared into the darkness. I stood there shaking, fumbling with my phone that still had no service. It was freezing and I had no idea where I was. Some abandoned platform in the middle of nowhere. No lights except for a single flickering bulb that barely illuminated a weathered bench. I sat there for what felt like hours, jumping at every sound, until the first morning train came through. The weird thing is, when I try to research that platform now, I can't find any record of it. I've looked at every map of the Providence-Boston line, and there's nothing there. Just a stretch of track through empty woods. I've tried asking Amtrak about it, but they have no record of my ticket from that night, even though I have the credit card charge to prove I was on that train. Sometimes I lie awake at night, thinking about that voice, that smell, that wrong face. But mostly I think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten off at my stop. I've taken Ubers to work every day since then. The surge pricing is worth it. Because every time I see a train now, I can't help but wonder if he's in there, sitting perfectly still, moving closer each time the lights flicker, waiting for someone else to notice him. I still have nightmares about that smile. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can hear that wet sound like someone practicing how to be human. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last February. I've been trying to make sense of it for months, but I just can't. I drive a lot for work. I'm a medical equipment sales rep covering 3 states in the Midwest. Usually I plan my stays in advance, but that night was different. My last meeting ran way longer than expected. By 9 p.m., I was still 4 hours from home, fighting to keep my eyes open on this pitch-black stretch of Highway 71. The snow had started falling pretty heavily, and the forecast showed it getting worse. I knew I had to stop somewhere, anywhere really. I almost missed the sign for Mountain Pass Motel, just a dim, flickering neon light casting a reddish glow through the falling snow. The parking lot was empty except for a rusty pickup truck I assumed belonged to the staff. The place looked run down but not completely decrepit. You know, the kind of roadside motel that's seen better days but still keeps the lights on for travelers like me. The office smelled like old cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. Behind the desk sat this older guy, probably in his 60s, reading a paperback with yellowed pages. He barely looked up when I walked in, just held up one finger while he finished his page. The wall clock behind him read 9:47 p.m. "Need a room," I said, trying to sound more awake than I felt. "Just for tonight." He slowly put his book down and started typing into an ancient computer. The keyboard clicks seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet office. "Single or double?" "Single's fine." I grabbed my wallet. "How much?" "65 even. Checkout's at 11. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't used it in a while. While he processed my card, I noticed the room key rack behind him was completely full except for that one key he'd grabbed for me. Room 114. "Slow night, huh?" I said, trying to make conversation. He just grunted and handed me my key, an actual metal key attached to a blue plastic tag, not one of those electronic cards. End of the building on the right. Vending machines are in the middle. Office closes at 10, reopens at 6. I grabbed my overnight bag from the car and headed to my room. The snow was really coming down now, already covering my footprints by the time I reached the door. The key stuck a little, but the room itself was clean enough. Just your basic motel setup with a queen bed, TV, and bathroom. The heater took a few minutes to kick in, rattling like it was shaking off a long sleep. I did my usual routine: quick shower, check emails, call my girlfriend to let her know where I was. The cell signal was weak, but I managed to get through. "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired. Some little motel off 71. I'll head out first thing tomorrow." By 11 p.m. I was in bed, half watching some old sitcom reruns. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. I mean, really quiet. No car sounds from the highway, no footsteps from other guests, no doors closing. Just complete silence, except for the heater's occasional rumble. I must have dozed off because the first knock startled me awake. 3 sharp raps on my door, clear as day. The TV was still on, casting blue light across the room. The clock read 2:17 a.m. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange in the quiet room. No answer. I sat up, fully awake now. Another knock, same pattern. Tap, tap, tap. I got up and approached the door, trying to see through the peephole, but it was too dark outside. "Who is it?" I asked louder this time. Still nothing. Then the doorknob started rattling. Not violently, but deliberately, like someone was testing it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The rattling stopped, then started again, more insistent this time. I grabbed my phone. 2 bars, thank God. I called the front desk, hands shaking as I dialed the number posted by the room phone. It rang 7 times before someone picked up. Front desk. Same raspy voice from earlier. "This is room 114. Someone's at my door, trying to get in." A long pause. "That's not possible, sir. You're our only guest tonight." My mouth went dry. "What? But I can hear them right now. They're literally rattling my doorknob." "Sir, I can assure you, you're the only person checked in. I'm looking at the registry right now." As if to prove him wrong, 3 more knocks, louder this time. "You heard that, right?" I practically shouted into the phone. "I didn't hear anything, sir. Would you like me to come check?" "Yes, please, right now." "I'll be there in 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes felt like hours. The knocking had stopped, but now I could hear something else. A soft, scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the door. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, phone in one hand, room key in the other, ready to bolt if needed. The scraping stopped. Footsteps crunched in the snow outside, then a flashlight beam swept across my window. A knock at my door, different from the others, more professional somehow. "Front desk," the raspy voice called out. I checked the peephole first. It was him, looking annoyed and cold. I opened the door just enough to see him properly. "There's no one out here, sir," he said, sweeping his flashlight across the empty walkway. "And look, no footprints in the snow except mine and yours from earlier." He was right. The snow in front of my door was pristine except for his fresh footprints and my partially filled-in ones from hours ago. But I started, then stopped. How could I explain what I'd heard when there was no evidence? "Probably just the wind," he said. "These old buildings make all kinds of noises. Try to get some sleep." He turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. I shut and locked the door, then wedged the room's only chair under the handle for good measure. Sleep was out of the question now. I sat on the bed, back against the headboard, and kept my eyes fixed on that door. At 3:42 a.m., the knocking started again. Same pattern, tap, tap, tap. But this time, something else happened. The TV suddenly switched to static, filling the room with gray noise. When I tried to turn it off, it wouldn't respond. Not to the remote, not to the power button, nothing. The static began to form patterns. I know how crazy this sounds, but I swear I could see shapes moving in it, like shadows passing behind a frosted glass. And the noise, it started to sound less like static and more like whispers. The temperature in the room dropped so fast I could see my breath. The heater was still running, but it might as well have been blowing ice. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone to try calling the front desk again. This time no one answered. The knocking got louder, more insistent. The doorknob rattled so hard I thought it would break. The chair legs scraped against the floor as something pushed against the door. The static on the TV grew louder, the whispers more distinct, though I still couldn't make out any words. I grabbed my bag and car keys, ready to make a run for it, weather be damned. But just as I stood up, everything stopped. The TV clicked off. The temperature began to rise. The knocking and rattling ceased completely. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too loudly. The clock ticked over to 4 a.m., then 4:30, then 5 or... Nothing happened, just silence. When dawn finally started to break around 6:15 a.m., I was still standing there, keys in hand. I waited until I could see sunlight through the curtains before opening the door. The snow outside was untouched except for those same footprints from the night before, mine and the clerk's. The morning was perfectly normal, almost mockingly so. Birds were chirping. The sun was rising over the highway. A few cars drove past. I walked to the office on shaky legs. A different clerk was there, a young woman who looked like she'd just started her shift. When I tried to ask her about the night clerk, she looked confused. Night clerk? We don't have a night clerk, she said. Office closes at 10, opens at 6. Always has. I checked out immediately and drove home in a daze. Later that day, I looked up the Mountain Pass Motel online, thinking maybe others had similar experiences. But I couldn't find it. Not on any booking sites, not on Google Maps, nowhere. I've driven that stretch of Highway 71 several times since then, in daylight, looking for that faded sign. It's not there. I still travel for work, but I plan my stays more carefully now. Chain hotels only, preferably crowded ones. Sometimes late at night, when I'm in a hotel room and everything gets quiet, I find myself staring at the door waiting to hear that familiar tap, tap, tap. So far, it hasn't come, but I always keep the TV off just in case. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last month at Valley View Mall. I've been into urban exploration photography for a few years now, documenting abandoned buildings around my city. Usually the scariest things I encounter are unstable floors or the occasional raccoon. But what happened that day? I'm still trying to process it. I'd heard Valley View had been completely abandoned since 2019. It was this massive shopping complex from the 80s that slowly died out as newer malls opened up nearby. I'd seen some amazing photos online of the empty corridors and defunct storefronts, so I figured it would make for a perfect solo shoot on my day off. I parked my car in the crumbling lot around 2 p.m., figuring I'd have plenty of daylight. The exterior was exactly what you'd expect: faded signs, broken windows, graffiti everywhere. I found an unlocked service entrance near the old food court and slipped inside with my camera gear. The first hour was incredible. The silence was eerie, but peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the skylights, creating these beautiful shadows across the empty walkways. I got some amazing shots of the abandoned fountains and these creepy mannequins left behind in display windows. The decay was haunting, but photogenic. I was setting up a shot of an old carousel in the central court when I heard voices echoing from somewhere nearby. My heart started racing. Security guards, maybe? But the place had been abandoned for years. I quickly packed up my tripod, ready to bail if needed. That's when I saw them. A small group of people emerging from one of the old department stores. There were 5 of them, looking pretty rough around the edges. Homeless folks, I assumed. The oldest guy, probably in his 50s with a scraggly gray beard, spotted me first. "Hey there, photographer," he called out way too cheerfully. "Don't be scared, we're just the current tenants." I was frozen, unsure whether to run or try to explain myself. But they all seemed so normal. Friendly, even. The older guy introduced himself as Mike and explained they'd been living in the mall for about 8 months. There was something disarming about how open they were about it. "You should see how we've fixed up the old Macy's," a younger woman named Sarah said. "We've made it pretty cozy. Want to check it out? Your camera would love it." I know how naive this sounds now, but they seemed genuinely excited to show someone what they'd done with the place. And I was curious. I'd never seen how people actually lived in these abandoned spaces. Plus, there were women in the group, which made me feel a bit safer. The home they'd created was actually impressive at first glance. They'd transformed the old department store into a makeshift living space, using display fixtures as room dividers and salvaged furniture to create little personal areas. They even had a kitchen set up using camping stoves. Mike offered me some water, which I accepted. It was bottled, so I figured it was safe. They asked about my photography, seemed really interested in my work, but something felt off. I noticed they kept positioning themselves between me and the exits. Every time I mentioned leaving, they'd quickly change the subject or insist I had to see something else. "You haven't even seen the best part yet," Mike kept saying. "Just wait until sunset. The light through the skylights makes this place magical." That's when I started noticing other things. The way they'd glance at each other when they thought I wasn't looking. How their smiles never quite reached their eyes. The fact that I hadn't seen any phones or personal belongings that someone could easily grab if they needed to leave quickly. I made my first attempt to leave after about an hour. Thanks so much for showing me around, but I should really get going. I've got dinner plans. Sarah's hand gripped my arm, not violently, but firmly. But you haven't tried my special tea yet. I picked the herbs myself from our rooftop garden. Everyone who visits has to try it. The way she said everyone who visits sent ice down my spine. Had there been others? Where were they now? I noticed more details then. Scratch marks on some of the support columns. A few suspicious dark stains on the carpet that didn't look like water damage. A door that clearly had fresh locks on it, despite this being a squatter situation. Mike must have noticed me looking because his whole demeanor shifted slightly. His smile became fixed, almost plastic. You know, it's really not safe to leave right now. There's some dangerous people who come through here in the evenings. You should stay until morning. That's when panic really started setting in. I knew I had to get out, but they had me outnumbered and probably knew this place way better than I did. I needed to play it smart. I forced myself to smile, tried to keep my voice steady. You're probably right, but I really need to use the bathroom first. Too much coffee earlier. They led me to what had been the store's employee restroom. Sarah started to follow me in, but I laughed it off. I'm pretty shy about that stuff. Just give me a minute. As soon as the door closed, I frantically looked for options. The window was small, but I thought I could squeeze through. Problem was, I was on the second floor. But I'd noticed a lower roof section outside earlier while taking photos. I could hear them talking quietly outside the door. I knew I only had minutes before they got suspicious. Using my camera bag to break the window would make too much noise, so I had to use my jacket wrapped around my elbow. It took 3 hard hits before it shattered. The sound was louder than I'd hoped. Immediately, I heard Mike's voice. "Everything okay in there?" "Sorry," I called back, trying to sound normal. "Just knocked over the paper towel holder." I could hear them trying to open the door as I squeezed through the window. Thank God I was right about the lower roof. I dropped down onto it, pain shooting through my ankles, but adrenaline kept me moving. Behind me, I could hear shouting. The lower roof connected to a maintenance ladder on the building's exterior. I practically slid down it, scraping my palms raw but not caring. I ran to my car faster than I've ever run in my life. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I saw them emerge from a side door. Mike was in front, and that fake friendly smile was completely gone. He just stared as I drove away, and somehow that was worse than if he'd chased me. I called the police once I was safely home, but when they checked the mall the next day, they said they found no evidence of anyone living there. No makeshift home, no camping stoves, nothing. Just empty retail space. But they weren't looking hard enough. Because I've driven past that mall a few times since then, always in broad daylight, always from a safe distance. And sometimes, if I look at just the right angle through the broken skylights, I swear I can see movement inside. People walking around like they're shopping in a store that's been closed for years. I still have my camera with all the photos I took that day. Well, most of them. The ones from inside their home in the old Macy's are gone, somehow deleted. But that's probably for the best. I don't need any reminders of what I saw there or what might have happened if I hadn't gotten away. I don't do urban exploration anymore. These days I stick to nature photography. At least out in the woods, you can see the dangerous things coming. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything there was to see on America's highways. But what happened to me last month on that stretch of I-80 in western Nebraska still keeps me up at night. I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to make it home that night. It was around 2 a.m. when I pulled into this rest stop about 40 miles west of North Platte. I'd been driving since Kansas City, and even though I still had a few hours left before hitting my limit, I really needed to use the bathroom and grab some coffee. The place was practically deserted, which isn't unusual for that time of night, except for this beat-up white Ford Explorer parked in the far corner of the lot, engine running. Something about that SUV just didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was because the driver had backed into the spot, facing the exit, or maybe it was the way the headlights were off but the engine was still going. I've learned to trust my gut in this line of work, and every instinct was telling me something was off. I parked my rig under one of the few working lights in the lot, making sure I had a clear view of my mirrors. The rest stop building was maybe 50 yards from where I parked. As I walked toward it, I kept glancing at that Explorer. The windows were tinted, but I could have sworn I saw movement inside. The rest stop was one of those older ones. You know, the kind with the flickering fluorescent lights and that weird smell of industrial cleaner that never quite masks anything. The whole time I was in there, I couldn't shake this crawling sensation between my shoulder blades like someone was watching me. When I came out, that Explorer hadn't moved an inch, but the engine was still running. I got back to my truck as quickly as I could without actually running. As I climbed into the cab, I noticed something in my side mirror. The Explorer's parking lights had just clicked on. I fired up my engine, and that's when I saw it pull out of its spot, real slow and deliberate-like. I waited a minute before pulling out, hoping they'd go on ahead, but they just idled there by the exit, waiting. I had no choice but to get back on the highway. The Explorer followed me out, keeping a good distance at first, maybe 5 or 6 car lengths back. The highway was empty. I mean completely empty. Out there in western Nebraska, you can go 20-30 minutes without seeing another vehicle at that hour. Usually that's one of the things I love about night driving, but right then, it felt like being in one of those nightmares where you're all alone in the world. For the first few miles, I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Lots of people travel the same direction on highways, right? But then I noticed they were matching my speed exactly, staying the same distance behind me no matter what I did. I slowed down to 60, they slowed down. I sped up to 75, they sped up. I decided to test them. I put on my signal and moved to the right lane. They moved over too. I switched back to the left. They followed. My hands were getting sweaty on the wheel, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't normal highway behavior. They were definitely following me. About 10 miles in, they suddenly accelerated and pulled up right behind me, so close I couldn't see their headlights in my mirrors anymore. I've had plenty of cars ride my tail before, but this was different. They knew exactly what they were doing, staying in my blind spot, trying to make me nervous. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but out there I had no signal. Of course. I thought about using my CB radio, but at that hour in that part of the country, I knew the chances of another trucker being within range were slim. Then they started flashing their high beams, on, off, over and over, trying to blind me through my mirrors. I adjusted them, but they kept changing angles, finding new ways to get that light in my eyes. I was doing 80 by this point, which is faster than I like to take my rig, but they stayed right on me. Suddenly, they swerved into the left lane and started to pull up alongside me. My first thought was they were finally going to pass me, and this nightmare would be over. But they matched my speed exactly, staying right in my blind spot. I couldn't see if anyone was behind me anymore. I couldn't see if there was anything ahead in their lane. I was driving blind. That's when I noticed they were gradually trying to edge me toward the right shoulder. It was subtle at first. So subtle I might not have noticed if I wasn't already on high alert. But they were definitely drifting closer, inch by inch, forcing me to move over to avoid a collision. I couldn't move any further right without going onto the shoulder, and at 80 miles per hour that could have been deadly with my trailer. They knew this. They were trying to force me into an impossible choice. Either risk a crash by going onto the shoulder, or risk a crash by holding my ground. I was coming up on a slight curve in the highway, and I knew this was my only chance. There was a steep embankment on the right side of the road just after the curve. I hit my brakes, hard. The Explorer shot forward, not expecting the sudden deceleration. I heard their tires squeal as they swerved to avoid rear-ending me. My trailer jackknifed slightly, but I managed to keep control. The Explorer ended up ahead of me, fishtailing as they tried to recover. For a split second, their car was illuminated fully in my headlights, and I could see there were at least 2 people inside, maybe 3. They were all wearing dark hoodies or jackets, and I couldn't make out any faces. They regained control and slowed down, trying to fall behind me again, but I wasn't having it. I kept my speed low enough that they had to stay in front of me unless they wanted to come to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. We stayed like that for maybe another mile. Them in front, me keeping my distance but not letting them fall behind. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. They'd killed their taillights completely. On a dark highway with no moon, they'd basically become invisible. I slammed on my brakes and hit my hazards, scanning desperately for somewhere to turn around, somewhere to pull over, anywhere that might have people or cameras or witnesses. That's when I saw the lights of a state trooper parked in the median about a quarter mile ahead. I've never been so happy to see law enforcement in my life. The Explorer must have spotted them too, because they immediately took the next exit, one of those unnamed rural roads that disappear into the darkness. I pulled over and told the trooper everything. He radioed it in and took my statement, but I knew they were long gone. They probably knew those back roads well enough to disappear without a trace. The trooper ended up escorting me to the next major truck stop, about 30 miles down the road. I filed a police report, but without a license plate number. It was too dark to see one, and I suspect they might have removed it anyway. There wasn't much they could do. I checked the news for the next few weeks, worried I'd read about another trucker who wasn't as lucky as me, but I never saw anything. I still drive that route sometimes. I have to, it's part of the job. But I never stop at that rest area anymore, and I'm a lot more careful about who might be watching me when I do stop. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if that state trooper hadn't been there, or if I hadn't managed to keep control of my rig when I hit the brakes. The thing that really gets to me, though, is wondering how many times they'd done this before. How many other drivers had they followed? How many times had they practiced that routine with the high beams and the blind spots? They were too coordinated, too practiced for this to have been their first attempt. I've thought about quitting trucking since then, but this is my life, you know? I'm not going to let them take that from me, but I'd be lying if I said I don't check my mirrors a little more often now, especially when I'm driving through Nebraska at night. And every time I see a white Ford Explorer on the road, my heart skips a beat. The police never found them. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, waiting at some dark rest stop, watching for their next target. If you're a truck driver reading this, or really anyone who drives long distances at night, keep your eyes open. And if you see a vehicle matching that description, engine running in a dark corner of a rest stop, just keep driving. It's better to be tired than to never make it home at all. I still get chills thinking about what happened last summer while I was house-sitting for my cousin Rachel. She'd asked me to watch her place in suburbia for 3 weeks while she and her husband went on a delayed honeymoon to Europe. Being a broke grad student, I jumped at the chance. Free accommodation in a nice neighborhood. Plus, she'd pay me a bit for keeping an eye on things. Looking back, I wish I'd just stayed in my cramped apartment. The first few days were completely normal. Rachel's house was a cozy 2-story in one of those quiet neighborhoods where all the lawns are perfectly maintained, and everyone has a Ring doorbell. The kind of place where the most exciting thing that usually happens is someone's kid having a birthday party. I spent my days working remotely from her home office, taking care of her plants, and feeding her ancient cat, Mr. Whiskers. Everything changed on my 4th night there. I'm a light sleeper, and around 2 a.m. I was jolted awake by a loud thudding sound from next door. At first I tried to ignore it. Probably just someone getting home late, right? But then I heard it again, and again. It was a rhythmic sound, like something heavy being dragged or moved. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went to the spare bedroom window that overlooked the neighbor's house. What I saw made my skin crawl. The garage door was open, casting a rectangle of yellow light onto the driveway. A man, I assumed the neighbor, was methodically moving what looked like large, heavy black bags from a pickup truck into his garage. The weird part? He was being so precise about it. Each bag was handled with extreme care, like they contained something fragile or something that shouldn't be disturbed. I'd never met this neighbor. Rachel had mentioned the house belonged to some guy who kept to himself. I think she said his name was Paul or Peter, something with a P. She'd said he traveled a lot for work and wasn't around much. But watching him that night, something felt wrong. The mechanical way he moved. The fact that he was doing this at 2 a.m. The absolute silence except for the thudding of those bags being set down. I must have stood at that window for 20 minutes watching him. He made at least 8 trips from the truck to the garage. Each time, the same careful movements, the same gentle placement of each bag. I started to notice other details. How he always took exactly the same path across the driveway. How he seemed to be wearing some kind of thick gloves despite the summer heat. How he would pause for exactly the same amount of time after placing each bag before returning to the truck. Then, as if he could sense my presence, he stopped mid-motion and looked up, directly at my window. I ducked down so fast I banged my knee on the radiator, but I knew he'd seen me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I finally worked up the courage to peek out again, the garage door was closed and the truck was gone. I barely slept that night. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. People can do whatever they want on their own property, right? Maybe he worked nights. Maybe he was moving storage boxes. Maybe he had a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The next day, I tried to act normal. I worked. I watered the plants. I played with Mr. Whiskers. But I kept finding myself going to the window looking at that garage. The house was completely still during the day. No movement, no sounds, not even a curtain shifting. The more I looked, the more I noticed odd things I hadn't paid attention to before. All the windows had thick blackout curtains. There were no personal items visible anywhere. No welcome mat, no decorations, not even a stray leaf on the pristine driveway. It was like someone had created a perfect replica of a house but forgotten to add the little signs of life that make a home feel lived in. That evening, I ordered pizza for dinner. As I was paying the delivery guy, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The neighbor was standing on his front porch watching us. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just standing there, completely still, hands in his pockets. But something about his posture made my stomach turn. I hurried inside and locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the pizza. An hour later, my doorbell rang. I knew before I even looked who it would be. Through the peephole, I could see him standing there, tall, thin, wearing a plain dark jacket despite the warm evening. Everything about him looked normal, and that somehow made it worse. He rang again and again, each ring exactly 5 seconds apart. After the 4th ring, I heard his voice. "I know you're home. We need to talk about what you saw." My mouth went dry. I stood there, frozen, trying to decide what to do. Call the police? But what would I say? My neighbor is ringing my doorbell and wants to talk. I hadn't actually seen him do anything illegal. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I opened the door, keeping the chain on. He smiled when he saw me. It was a perfectly pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hi there," he said, his voice surprisingly warm and normal. "I'm Paul from next door. I couldn't help but notice you watching me last night." I tried to sound casual. "Oh yeah, sorry about that. I heard some noise and was just curious. I'm house sitting for Rachel." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "Curiosity is natural," he said softly. "But sometimes it's safer not to ask questions. Sometimes it's better not to look too closely at things that happen after dark." He paused, still smiling that empty smile. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" I nodded quickly, wanting nothing more than for this conversation to end. But he wasn't finished. "I like this neighborhood," he continued. "It's quiet, private. People here mind their own business. That's important to me. Very important." His voice had taken on an odd, rhythmic quality, almost like he was reciting something he'd said many times before. "I'd hate for anything to disturb that peace, wouldn't you?" Before I could respond, he reached into his jacket pocket. My heart nearly stopped, but he just pulled out what looked like a business card. He slid it through the gap in the door. "If you ever need to reach me, or if you ever feel like you need to, talk about anything you might see or hear, day or night." He emphasized those last words in a way that made my skin crawl. I picked up the card with trembling fingers. It was blank except for a phone number printed in simple black text. When I looked up again, he was already walking away, his movements as precise and measured as they had been the night before. That night I heard the sounds again. The garage door opening, the thudding of heavy objects being moved. But this time I stayed in bed, my eyes squeezed shut, trying to convince myself that I couldn't hear what sounded like something wet dripping onto concrete, or the faint metallic smell that seemed to seep in through the closed windows. The next morning I called Rachel and made up an excuse about a family emergency. I told her I'd find someone else to watch her house. She was understanding, even offered to help, but I was already packing my bags as we spoke. As I loaded my car, I noticed Paul's truck was gone, and the house looked exactly as it always did. Perfect, pristine, and somehow wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I drive past that neighborhood sometimes, usually during the day when everything looks normal, and I can almost convince myself I imagined the whole thing. But I never drive by at night. I don't want to know if that garage door is open, don't want to see what might be being moved in the darkness. The business card is still in my wallet, unopened, untouched. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I think about calling the number, about asking the questions that keep me awake at night. But then I remember his words about curiosity, and I put the card away. Rachel still lives next door to him. She says he's the perfect neighbor. Quiet, keeps to himself, never causes any trouble. Sometimes she mentions that she sees his truck coming and going at odd hours, and I want to tell her everything. But I stay quiet, because he was right about one thing. Sometimes it's safer not to ask questions. Sometimes it's better not to look too closely at the things that happen after dark. I don't know what he was moving that night. I don't want to know. But sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I remember the careful way he handled those bags, the metallic smell, the sound of dripping, and I lie awake wondering how many other people have stood at their windows in the middle of the night, watching him work, before learning to look away. I've been camping solo for over 8 years now, and nothing has ever made me question my safety in the wilderness until what happened at Maple Creek 3 weeks ago. I'm still trying to process everything, but I need to write this down while the details are fresh in my mind. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. I had a few days off work and decided to head to Maple Creek Campground, about 2 hours north of where I live. It's a pretty secluded spot. No RV hookups, just basic tent sites scattered through the woods. I'd been there twice before in peak season, but this time, being mid-October, I figured it would be nice and quiet. I wasn't wrong about that part. When I pulled into the gravel parking area around 2 p.m., there were only 2 other cars there. The ranger station was empty, typical for off-season, so I just filled out the self-registration form and picked Site 14, which I remembered as having a nice clearing for stargazing. It's about a quarter-mile hike from the parking area, which is one of the reasons I like it. Feels more remote than the sites closer to the entrance. I'm pretty efficient with my setup after years of doing this. Within an hour, I had my tent pitched, sleeping bag rolled out, and my cooking gear arranged on the picnic table. The weather was perfect, crisp fall air, barely any wind, and that golden afternoon light filtering through the trees. I spent the rest of the daylight gathering firewood and taking photos of some interesting mushrooms I found near my site. The first weird thing I noticed was around sunset. I was heating up my dinner, just some freeze-dried pasta, when I realized the woods had gone completely silent. If you spend time outdoors, you know what I mean. That sudden absence of bird calls and rustling that usually means a predator is nearby. I looked around but didn't see anything concerning. Still, something felt off. Like that feeling when you think someone's watching you, but every time you turn around, there's nothing there. I told myself I was being paranoid and focused on eating my dinner. By the time I finished, it was properly dark. I had a decent fire going and was just sitting there reading on my Kindle when I heard the first footsteps. They were coming from behind my tent, maybe 30 feet into the woods. Slow, deliberate steps on the leaf litter. Could have been a deer, but something about the rhythm felt too intentional. I called out, "Hello?" and shined my flashlight in that direction, but the beam just showed empty trees and undergrowth. The steps stopped immediately when I called out. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, completely still, just listening. Nothing. I decided it must have been an animal and went back to my reading, but I couldn't focus on the words anymore. Around 9:30 p.m., I decided to turn in. I made sure my fire was properly out, hung my food bag, bear safety is ingrained in me at this point, and got into my tent. I always keep my boots, headlamp, and pocket knife right by my sleeping bag, another habit from years of solo camping. I drifted off pretty quickly, despite still feeling slightly uneasy. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to pee. This is always the worst part of camping, having to leave your warm sleeping bag in the middle of the night. I grabbed my headlamp and unzipped the tent as quietly as possible. The moon was nearly full, so even before I turned on my light, I could see something wasn't right. My camping chair, which I'd left by the fire pit, was now positioned directly facing my tent about 10 feet away. I'm absolutely certain it wasn't there when I went to bed. I felt my heart rate spike. I shined my light around the campsite, half expecting to see someone sitting in the shadows, but there was nothing obvious out of place. I debated just peeing right next to my tent, but I was too worried about making noise. Instead, I pulled on my boots, grabbed my knife, though what good it would do against someone who was probably long gone, I don't know, and quickly walked to my usual spot about 40 feet from camp. When I got back, I noticed something else. My cooking gear, which I'd left neatly stacked on the picnic table, had been arranged in a perfect circle, not scattered, deliberately placed in a precise circular pattern. My pot in the center, with my cup, spork, and other utensils radiating out from it like spokes on a wheel. I stood there for what felt like forever, my headlamp beam fixed on this bizarre display. I know I should have packed up right then and hiked back to my car, but something kept me rooted there. Maybe it was shock, or maybe I was worried that whatever or whoever had done this was waiting somewhere between me and the parking lot. I got back in my tent, pulled my sleeping bag up to my chin, and lay there with my knife in one hand and my phone in the other. No signal, of course. The closest I'd gotten was one bar near the parking lot. I kept my headlamp on, telling myself that if someone was out there, at least they couldn't sneak up without me seeing their shadow on the tent wall. That's when the footsteps started again. This time they were circling my tent, slowly, methodically, about 15 feet out, if I had to guess. I could hear them crushing leaves, snapping the occasional twig. They made no attempt to be quiet. In fact, it felt like they wanted me to hear them. I started counting the circuits they made around my tent. 1, 2, 3. Each circle taking about 2 minutes to complete. On the fourth circuit, they stopped directly behind my tent. I was holding my breath, straining to hear any sound that might tell me what they were doing. Then something scraped against the outside of my tent. Not claws or anything sharp. It felt more like someone running their hand along the fabric. Just one slow, deliberate stroke from about head height down to the ground. I think I made some kind of involuntary noise because the touch stopped immediately. The footsteps retreated faster now, heading deeper into the woods. I lay there for what felt like hours, clutching my knife so hard my hand was cramping, listening to every tiny sound and imagining the worst. Eventually, pure exhaustion must have taken over, because I dozed off. I woke up to early morning light filtering through my tent. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing. Then I unzipped my tent door and saw what they'd done while I slept. Every single item I'd left outside, my chair, cooking gear, even the pile of firewood, had been arranged in a massive spiral pattern around my tent. The spiral started about 20 feet out and wound inward, with my tent at the center. It must have taken whoever did it at least an hour to place everything so precisely. But the worst part, the thing that made me throw everything into my backpack and practically run back to my car, was what they'd done with my hiking boots. Somehow they'd gotten them out of my tent while I slept, and I'm a light sleeper, especially after what had happened earlier. They'd placed them at the very center of the spiral, right in front of my tent door, facing inward. Perfectly aligned, exactly 1 inch apart. I didn't even roll up my tent properly, just yanked up the stakes, stuffed it in its bag, and got the hell out of there. I passed one of the rangers on my way out, driving in for his morning shift. I thought about stopping to report what happened, but what would I say? Someone rearranged my camping gear in creepy patterns? I had no proof anything actually threatening had occurred. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been camping since, and I'm not sure when or if I'll go again. I keep thinking about those footsteps, that deliberate touch on my tent, and most of all, how they managed to get my boots without waking me. I'm an experienced camper. I know most of the rational explanations for strange things you might encounter in the woods. This wasn't a bear or a raccoon, or even some random person trying to scare me. This felt purposeful, organized. Like whatever it was trying to tell me something. The strangest part? When I got home and was unpacking, I found something in one of my boots. A single maple leaf, folded perfectly in half, then in half again, until it was just a tiny triangle. It wasn't crushed or creased. Each fold was precise, deliberate, like origami. I still have it, pressed between the pages of my camping journal. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, trying to convince myself there's a logical explanation for everything that happened that night. But deep down, I know there isn't one. I've been camping in some pretty remote places over the years, but I've never felt unsafe until that night at Maple Creek. Whatever was out there wasn't just trying to scare me. It was trying to communicate something. I just wish I knew what. You never really notice the empty spaces until something fills them. For weeks, I barely paid attention to the large windows at the front of our convenience store. They were just there, letting in light during the day, reflecting the fluorescent glare at night. Then he appeared, and suddenly those windows became the only thing I could think about. The first time I saw him, I almost missed him entirely. It was around 2 a.m., and I was restocking the candy aisle, my back to the entrance. When I turned around to grab another box, I caught a glimpse of movement through the glass. A man was standing there, just outside the entrance, hands in his pockets, staring straight ahead. I didn't think much of it at first. Working the graveyard shift, you get all types. Drunk college students, insomniacs, truckers looking for coffee. But this guy didn't come in. He just stood there, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something. After about 10 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. He hadn't moved an inch, hadn't checked his phone, hadn't done any of the normal things people do when they're waiting. He just watched. I tried to focus on my work, but I kept finding myself glancing up, checking to see if he was still there. He was. Always. Around 3 a.m., he finally left. No dramatic exit, no acknowledgement. He just turned and walked away into the darkness. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and tried to shake off the weird feeling he'd left behind. The next night, he was back. Same time, same spot, same unsettling stillness. This time, I got a better look at him. He was tall, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a worn jacket that hung loose on his frame. His face was what got me, though. There was something empty about it, like he was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. I considered calling my manager, but what would I say? That a man was standing outside the store? He wasn't doing anything wrong, technically. He was just standing there, watching. Night after night, he returned. Always at 2 a.m., always in the same spot. Sometimes he'd stay for an hour, sometimes longer. I started timing my breaks around his visits, hiding in the back room until I thought he'd be gone. But he seemed to know when I was avoiding him. On those nights, he'd stay longer, waiting me out. After 2 weeks of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what he wanted. One night, just after he'd taken up his usual position, I walked to the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I forced myself to sound calm. "Excuse me," I called through the glass. "Can I help you with something?" He didn't respond immediately. His eyes, which had been fixed on some point in the distance, slowly shifted to meet mine. A small smile crept across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those stayed cold, calculating. "Hello, Emma," he said softly. I felt my blood turn to ice. I hadn't told him my name. My name tag was hidden under my jacket. I always kept it covered during night shifts, a basic safety precaution. But he knew. He knew my name. How do you know my name? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, just kept smiling that empty smile, his eyes never leaving mine. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. I wanted to run to the back room, call the police, do something, but I couldn't move. His gaze held me there, like a mouse trapped by a snake. You should be more careful, he said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. You never know who's watching. I turned and ran to the back office, fumbling with my phone as I tried to dial 911. When I finally got through, I was practically hyperventilating. The dispatcher tried to calm me down as I explained what was happening, but my words came out in a jumbled rush. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the area but found nothing. They took my statement, told me they'd increase patrols in the area, but I could tell they didn't think it was serious. Just another nervous night shift worker spooked by a harmless stranger, but he wasn't harmless. I knew it in my bones. The next night, I was on edge from the moment my shift started. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. When 2 a.m. rolled around, I found myself staring at the front windows, waiting. He didn't disappoint. This time, though, something was different. He was closer to the glass, close enough that I could see his face clearly in the fluorescent light. He was staring directly at me, that same empty smile playing across his lips. I missed you, Emma, he called out, loud enough for me to hear from behind the counter. Did you miss me? I didn't respond. My hand was already on the phone, ready to call the police again. I know you're afraid, he continued, placing one hand against the glass. But you don't have to be. I just want to talk. We have so much in common, you and I. Leave me alone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll call the police. He laughed, a hollow sound that made my skin crawl. They won't understand, they never do. But I understand you, Emma. I know everything about you. To prove his point, he started listing off details about my life. Where I lived, what car I drove, my favorite coffee shop, my cat's name. Things he couldn't possibly know, shouldn't know. With each new detail, I felt my world shrinking, becoming smaller and more dangerous. How? I started to ask, but my voice failed me. I've been watching, he said simply, as if that explained everything. I've been watching for a long time. You just never noticed me before. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911 again, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. He watched me do it, that smile never wavering. They won't get here in time, he said softly. They never do. But don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. Not yet. I just want you to know that I'm here. That I'll always be here watching. He stepped back from the glass, still smiling. See you tomorrow, Emma. This time, when he walked away, I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't handle another night of wondering if he'd show up, of feeling those eyes on me, of hearing him recite details about my life like he was reading from a script. I moved across town, changed my phone number, did everything I could to disappear. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of someone standing outside my window. Just a shadow, a suggestion of a shape in the darkness. And even though I can never quite make out their face, I know it's him. Still watching. Still waiting. I've learned to keep my curtains closed now, to vary my routine, to always look over my shoulder. I've learned that the scariest monsters aren't the ones that chase you. They're the ones that wait. The ones that watch. The ones that know your name even when you've never told them. Because that's the thing about empty spaces. Once something fills them, you can never see them the same way again. Every window becomes a potential viewpoint. Every shadow might hide a watcher. Every stranger might be him, waiting to remind me that he's still out there. I don't work night shifts anymore. I can't handle the quiet, the isolation, the way darkness turns windows into mirrors. But even in the daylight, even in crowds, I sometimes feel his eyes on me. And when I pass by convenience stores at night, I can't help but glance at the windows, searching for that familiar silhouette. Because I know he's still out there, still watching, still waiting. And the worst part? He was right about one thing. The police never did understand. How could they? How could anyone understand the terror of being watched, really watched, by someone who knows everything about you but remains a stranger? How do you explain the way it changes you, makes you question every moment of privacy, every casual glance, every coincidental meeting? You can't. You can only do what I did, run, hide, and pray that someday they'll find someone else to watch. But deep down, you know the truth. Once someone like that chooses you, they never really let go. They become a part of your story, a shadow in your peripheral vision, a presence you can never quite shake. So here I am, living my life, trying to pretend everything's normal. But I know better now. I know that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what might happen to you. It's the knowledge that someone is out there, learning every detail of your life, waiting for the perfect moment to remind you that you're never truly alone. Because in the end, that's what real horror is. Not the jump scares or the gore or the things that go bump in the night. It's the slow, creeping realization that your life isn't entirely your own anymore. That someone else has claimed a piece of it, has made themselves at home in your nightmares. And sometimes, on particularly dark nights, I find myself standing at my window, staring out into the darkness, wondering if he's out there right now, watching, waiting, smiling that empty smile. Because he was right about one more thing, he'll always be here. Even if I never see him again, even if he's long gone, the fear he planted in me has taken root. It's grown into something permanent, something that changes the way I see the world. Every window is now a potential portal for watching eyes. Every stranger might be him in disguise. Every quiet moment might be interrupted by that soft voice saying my name, reminding me that I'm never truly alone. That's his real legacy. Not the fear of what he might do, but the fear of what he's already done. He's changed the way I see the world, turned every safe space into a potential threat, every moment of solitude into a moment of vulnerability. And somewhere out there, I know he's smiling about it. The first note seemed innocent enough. Just a torn piece of paper lying on top of a pallet of boxes. Good night, Alex. Simple words that shouldn't have meant anything. But in an empty warehouse at 2 a.m., when you're supposed to be completely alone, even the simplest words can feel like a threat. I'd been working the night shift at the warehouse for about 2 months. It wasn't a bad job. Just me and a couple other guys, Eddie and Mike, organizing pallets and getting everything ready for the morning crew. I liked the simplicity of it. Put in my earbuds, zone out, and let the hours slip by without having to deal with bosses breathing down my neck or customers demanding attention. The warehouse was huge, rows upon rows of metal shelving stretching up toward the ceiling, filled with everything from electronics to furniture. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, creating pools of harsh white light between long shadows. Most nights I worked alone in my section, which was fine by me. Eddie usually stuck to the loading docks and Mike handled the inventory office. When I found that first note, I figured it was probably just Eddie messing around. Though it struck me as odd. Eddie wasn't really the type for pranks. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself mostly. When I asked him about it later, he just shrugged, looking genuinely confused. "Wasn't me, man," he said, not even looking up from his clipboard. Maybe it was left over from day shift. I tried to brush it off, but something about it nagged at me. The paper had been placed deliberately right where I would find it during my rounds. And my name, Alex. It wasn't like it was posted anywhere. I didn't even wear a name tag. The next night, there was another note in the exact same spot. This time it had my full name, Alex Martin. My stomach did a little flip when I read it. 2 nights in a row couldn't be a coincidence, and now whoever was leaving these knew my last name too. I started paying more attention to my surroundings after that, checking around corners before turning them, listening for footsteps that weren't my own. The warehouse felt different now, like the shadows between the shelves had depth, like they might be hiding something, or someone. The notes kept coming. Sometimes they'd be simple, just my name or a random phrase, but then they started getting more personal. "How's your mom doing after the surgery?" I froze when I read that one. I hadn't told anyone at work about my mom's knee surgery. It wasn't exactly break room conversation material. How could anyone here know about that? "Did your brother like his birthday present?" That one made my blood run cold. I had just sent my younger brother a gift card for his birthday 2 days ago. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. "You left your apartment door unlocked this morning." That was the one that really got to me. Because I had, in my rush to make it to work on time, I'd forgotten to lock up. But how could anyone know that? The implications made my skin crawl. I started documenting everything, taking pictures of the notes with my phone, noting where I found them and when. They always appeared in areas where I was working alone, always when no one else was around. I tried setting up my phone to record while I worked, hoping to catch whoever was leaving them, but the battery died every time. Something about the warehouse's metal shelving messed with the signal. One night I decided to stay in one spot and watch the pallet where I usually found the notes. I turned off my forklift, killed the lights in my section, and waited in the darkness. Hours passed. My legs cramped from standing still, my eyes strained in the dim light. Then I heard it. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving somewhere in the darkness behind me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the vast space. "Someone there?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with anticipation. I switched on my flashlight, sweeping the beam through the shadows, but there was nothing, just rows of boxes and empty air. When I turned back to the pallet, there was a new note. "You shouldn't be here." My hands started shaking. I hadn't seen anyone approach, hadn't heard them over the sound of my own breathing, but someone had been close enough to leave that note, close enough to touch me if they'd wanted to. I started moving back toward the main area where Eddie worked, trying to keep my pace normal even though every instinct screamed at me to run. The footsteps started again, following me, slow, steady, getting closer. "Eddie?" I called out, hoping it was just him playing some elaborate prank. "That you?" No response. Just those footsteps, matching my pace, staying just out of sight. I broke into a run, no longer caring how it looked. The sound of my feet slapping against the concrete floor echoed off the walls, mixing with the footsteps behind me that were now running too. I burst into the loading dock area, gasping for breath. Eddie looked up from his work, startled. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned to look behind me, but there was no one there, just the dark corridor I'd run through, silent and empty. Did you see anyone come through here?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. Eddie shook his head. "Just you, running like something was chasing you." I told him everything then, about the notes, the footsteps, all of it. He listened, his face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "We should check the security cameras," he said finally. We went to the security office, but when we tried to access the footage, the system showed nothing but static for the areas where I'd been working. Eddie frowned, clicking through different cameras and timestamps. "That's weird," he muttered. "These cameras were working fine earlier." A new note was waiting for me when I returned to my section. "You think they'll believe you? You think they can help?" I quit that night, walked straight to the manager's office, handed in my badge, and left without even waiting for my last paycheck. It wasn't worth it. No job was worth feeling like that, like I was being hunted. But leaving the warehouse didn't end it. The notes followed me home. I found them everywhere, tucked under my windshield wipers, slipped under my apartment door, even in my mailbox. Each one more personal than the last, each one proving that whoever was behind this was still watching me, still knew every detail of my life. "Your sister's wedding is coming up soon. Hope you wrote your speech." That coffee shop you like on 5th Street is closing next week. You really should change the bulb in your bedroom. The flickering is bad for your eyes. I went to the police, showed them the notes, tried to explain how someone was stalking me. They took a report, promised to look into it, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. After all, what crime had been committed? Someone leaving notes? Someone watching from a distance? But that's the thing about being watched. It changes you, makes you question everything, everyone. Every stranger on the street might be them. Every car that passes might contain those eyes that have been following you. Every shadow might hide the person who knows too much about your life. I moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, even switched jobs. But the note still found me. Less frequent now, but still there, still personal, still letting me know that I hadn't escaped. The last one appeared yesterday, pinned to my front door. You can't hide from me, Alex. I'm a part of your life now. Always watching, always knowing. Sweet dreams. I don't sleep much anymore. Can't relax, can't let my guard down, because somewhere out there, someone is watching me. Someone knows everything about me, follows my every move, documents my life in these little notes that appear like clockwork. And the worst part? I still don't know who they are. They could be anyone, a former coworker, a neighbor, a stranger who picked me at random. They could be watching me right now as I write this, planning their next note, deciding what detail of my life to reveal next. Sometimes I think about going back to the warehouse, about facing whoever it is, demanding answers. But then I remember those footsteps in the dark, that feeling of being hunted. And I know I can't. Because deep down, I'm afraid of what I might find. Afraid that knowing might be worse than not knowing. So I live with it. I've learned to check every room when I come home, to vary my routine, to always be aware of my surroundings. I've learned that privacy is an illusion, that someone is always watching, always knowing. And sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I find myself wondering if they're out there right now, writing their next note, planning their next reveal. Wondering if they're smiling as they watch me through my window, knowing that they've changed my life forever. Because that's what they've done. Changed everything. Every moment of privacy is now suspect. Every quiet moment might be observed. Every personal detail might become their next note. And somewhere in the shadows, they're still watching. Still knowing. Still writing. Always watching. Always knowing. The thing about working in a toll booth at night is that you start to see patterns, like how truckers always fumble with their change, or how the red-eye commuters barely look at you, desperate to get home. But that night, when those headlights cut through my window at 1 a.m., everything about the pattern felt wrong. I'd been half dozing in my chair, the radio humming softly in the background. The sound of an approaching engine made me sit up straighter, my hands automatically reaching for the cash drawer. But the car didn't pull up to my window like they usually do. Instead, it stopped about 20 feet back, headlights blazing directly into my booth. At first, I figured they were just checking their wallet or phone. It happens sometimes. People realizing at the last second they need to dig out exact change. But a minute passed, then 2. The engine idled steadily, but no one got out. No window rolled down. Just those lights, flooding my small glass box with harsh white glare. I tried to see through the windshield, but the angle of the headlights made it impossible. All I could make out was a dark silhouette behind the wheel, completely still. My hand hovered over the radio. We were supposed to call in anything suspicious, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That someone was sitting in their car? They'd laugh me right off the channel. I leaned out my window, waving my arm to signal them forward. "Hey there, you can pull up to the window." My voice sounded thin in the night air. The car didn't move. The figure didn't respond. They just sat there, watching me through that wall of light. The minutes stretched on. 5, then 10. My palms started to sweat. Every horror story I'd ever heard about toll booth operators started creeping into my mind. We're sitting ducks out here, isolated on these lonely stretches of road. Perfect targets. I checked my phone, but the signal was weak. It always is out here. The radio felt more tempting now, but something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe the fear of looking foolish. Instead, I busied myself with paperwork, pretending this was normal, all while keeping one eye on that motionless car. After 15 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up the radio, pride be damned. But just as my fingers wrapped around it, the headlights switched off. The sudden darkness was jarring, making me blink rapidly as my eyes tried to adjust. For a moment, all I could hear was the idle of the engine. Then I heard a car door open. My heart jumped into my throat as I squinted into the darkness. A tall figure stepped out of the driver's side, but didn't approach the booth. Instead, they just stood there, leaning against their car, arms crossed. Even without the glare, I still couldn't make out their features clearly, just their outline in the dim highway lights. "Sir?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you need directions?" No response, just that steady stare. I could feel it now, even if I couldn't see their eyes clearly. The weight of their gaze pressed against me like a physical thing. Minutes crawled by. I started feeling sick, my hands clammy, my breathing shallow. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. But that was crazy, right? I was safe in my booth. The glass was thick. The door was locked. I just had to wait them out. Then they smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was slow, deliberate, like they'd been planning it all along. Like they wanted me to know they were in control. That smile said they could wait all night if they needed to. That they knew I was trapped. I grabbed the radio, no longer caring if I sounded paranoid. But before I could press the button, I heard footsteps. Soft, measured steps moving around my booth. I couldn't see them anymore. They'd moved into my blind spot, but I could hear them circling, like a shark testing its prey. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, pressing myself against the far wall. The handle didn't move. They didn't try to get in. But I could feel them standing there, just inches away, separated only by a thin layer of glass and metal. My finger hovered over the radio button, but fear had paralyzed me. What if they heard me call for help? What would they do then? The silence stretched on, broken only by the pounding of my heart and the faint hum of the overhead lights. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the footsteps moving away. I allowed myself to breathe again, looking up just in time to see them walking back to their car. They got in slowly, like they had all the time in the world. The engine revved once and they pulled forward. But they didn't stop at my window. Instead, they drove slowly past the booth, rolling to a stop just a few feet ahead. That smile was back, wider now, more certain. They were letting me know they could come back any time. That this wasn't over. I sat there frozen, staring back at them through my window. Time seemed to stop as we locked eyes in my rearview mirror. Finally, after what felt like hours, they drove off into the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just sat in my booth, jumping at every sound, my eyes fixed on the road. Every pair of headlights made my heart race. Every passing car looked like it might be them coming back. When my relief arrived at dawn, I could barely speak. I just nodded, grabbed my things, and practically ran to my car. I quit that job the same day. No 2 weeks' notice, no explanation. I couldn't risk another night in that glass box, waiting to see if they'd come back. These days, I work day shifts at a busy office. No more lonely nights, no more isolated booths. But sometimes, when I'm driving home and pass a toll plaza, I think about that night, about that smile in my rearview mirror. And I wonder if they're still out there, playing their twisted game with someone else, waiting in the darkness behind their headlights. The worst part? I never saw their face clearly. Never got a good look at their car. They could be anyone. Sometimes, when I'm sitting at a red light and headlights flood my mirrors, I find myself checking, just for a second, to see if someone's watching me with that same calculating smile. Because that's what terror really is. Not the moment itself, but the way it stays with you. The way it changes how you see the world. Now I know that sometimes the real horror isn't in what happens to you. It's in what almost happens. In the waiting. in the not knowing, and in the fear that maybe, just maybe, they're still out there, watching, waiting, smiling. Mark wasn't right from the beginning. Anyone who's worked nights long enough develops a sort of sixth sense about people, and something about him set off every alarm bell I had. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just the way he watched. Always watching, like he was studying prey instead of doing his job. I'd been working the night shift at the factory for almost 3 years. It wasn't glamorous work. Maintaining equipment, monitoring production lines, making sure everything ran smoothly until the morning crew arrived. The building was massive, an old manufacturing plant with high ceilings, dim lighting, and the constant hum of machinery that eventually became white noise. Most nights there were only 5 of us spread throughout the facility. We each had our areas to cover, which meant long stretches of solitude broken only by radio checks or the occasional maintenance call. I was used to it, even liked it, until Mark started. He was new, maybe there about 2 weeks when I first noticed his habit. I'd be working on a machine, focused on my task, and I'd get that prickling sensation on the back of my neck. When I'd look up, there he'd be, half hidden behind some equipment, just staring, not even pretending to work, just watching me with those dead eyes. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was new and curious about the job. Maybe he was socially awkward. But there was something about the way he looked at me that made my skin crawl. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else, something hungry. One night I was calibrating a sensor on the upper level when I spotted him below, lurking behind a conveyor belt. He didn't move, didn't even blink. Just stood there, neck craned up, eyes fixed on me. I shouted down, asking if he needed something. "No," he called back, his voice oddly flat. "Just watching." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, like there was nothing strange about standing in the shadows staring at a coworker, made my blood run cold. I finished my work as quickly as I could and moved to a different area, but I could feel his eyes following me the whole way. After that, it got worse. He started showing up everywhere I went in the factory. I'd be in the maintenance room getting supplies, and he'd appear in the doorway. I'd be checking the production line, and he'd materialize on the catwalk above me. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of him ducking behind machinery or slipping around corners just as I turned to look. The really unnerving part was how he seemed to know where I'd be before I got there. If I had to check something in a remote corner of the facility, he'd already be there waiting in the shadows. It was like he could predict my movements, like he had memorized my routine better than I had. I tried talking to my supervisor about it, but how do you explain something like that? The new guy keeps staring at me? It sounds ridiculous, petty even. Besides, Mark was always careful to stay just on the edge of appropriate behavior. Never close enough to be threatening. Never doing anything that could be called harassment. Just watching. Then came the night that changed everything. I was doing my rounds in the East Wing, an older section of the factory that was mostly used for storage. The lighting was poor there, with more shadows than illumination. I turned a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. Mark was standing at the end of the hallway, perfectly still, like he'd been waiting for me. But something was wrong. His posture was off, almost unnatural, and his head was tilted at a strange angle. Even from a distance, I could see his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Do you ever feel watched?" he asked, his voice echoing oddly in the empty space. "Like someone's learning everything about you piece by piece?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. My throat had gone dry, and every instinct was screaming at me to run. "I've been watching you," he continued, taking a step forward. "Learning your patterns, your habits, the way you move, the way you work. It's fascinating, really, how predictable humans can be." The way he said humans, like he wasn't one himself, sent a shiver down my spine. I took a step back, reaching for my radio, but before I could grab it, he spoke again. "They won't get here in time, you know. They never do. Not in a place this big with so many places to hide." He took another step forward, and in the shifting shadows, his face seemed to change. The blank expression he usually wore melted into something else, something hungry and wild. His smile was too wide, too many teeth. I ran. I didn't care about looking professional or rational anymore. I just ran, my footsteps echoing off the walls, mixing with the sound of machinery and my own panicked breathing. I could hear him behind me, his pace steady, unhurried, like he knew he didn't need to rush. I made it to the main production floor, ducking between machines, trying to lose him in the maze of equipment. But every time I thought I'd gotten away, I'd spot him. Sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, sometimes above on the catwalks. It was impossible. He couldn't be in all these places. Finally, I reached the break room where I knew Tom, another operator, would be having his lunch. I burst through the door, gasping for breath, but the room was empty. On the table was a half-eaten sandwich and an open thermos, still steaming. Tom should have been there. He always took his break at this time. "Looking for Tom?" Mark's voice came from behind me, making me jump. He went home early, wasn't feeling well. I spun around. He was blocking the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the floor. That unnatural smile was still on his face, and his eyes weren't right. They looked almost black in the fluorescent lighting. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "To understand," he replied, tilting his head at that impossible angle again. "To learn, to watch. You're also interesting when you think no one's looking, but someone's always looking. I'm always looking. Stay back," I warned, grabbing a chair and holding it between us like a shield. "I'll call security." He laughed, a hollow, empty sound that didn't sound human at all. "Go ahead, call them. But they won't understand what they're seeing. They never do." I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands, but before I could dial, the lights flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, I could hear him moving closer, his breathing strange and raspy. "Don't you want to know what I've seen?" he whispered, now somehow right next to my ear. "Don't you want to know what I've learned about you?" The emergency lights kicked on, casting everything in a red glow. He was inches away from me, his face twisted into something that only vaguely resembled a human expression. I swung the chair at him and ran, not looking back, not stopping until I reached my car. I quit that night, called my supervisor from the parking lot and told him I wasn't coming back. He tried to convince me to stay, said he'd talk to HR about Mark's behavior, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. How do you file a complaint about someone who might not even be human? I found a new job, day shift this time, at a small workshop across town. But I still see him sometimes. In crowds, on street corners, in the rearview mirror of my car, just standing there watching. Always watching. Sometimes I wonder if he's found someone new to study, or if I'm still his favorite subject. The worst part is the uncertainty. Was he just a disturbed person with an obsession? Or was he something else entirely? Something wearing human skin like a poorly fitting suit? I'll never know. But I've learned to check the shadows now, to notice the empty spaces where someone might be hiding. Because somewhere out there, he's still watching. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I swear I can feel those eyes on me. Studying, learning, watching. Always watching. Because that's what he does. That's what he is. A watcher in the darkness, learning our patterns, our habits, our fears, and maybe, just maybe, waiting for the right moment to show us what he really is. I don't work nights anymore. Can't stand the thought of being alone in dark places with too many shadows. But even in broad daylight, I sometimes catch myself looking over my shoulder, searching for that familiar silhouette, that unnatural stance, those dead eyes. Because once you've been watched like that, really watched, you never feel quite alone again. There's always that nagging sensation, that prickling on the back of your neck, that makes you wonder, is he there? Is he watching? Is he learning? They say every building has its own personality after dark. A school becomes a maze of echoing hallways and creaking doors. A hospital transforms into a labyrinth of shadowed corridors and humming machines. But an office building, that's different. During the day, it's all fluorescent lights and keyboard clicks, but at night it becomes something else entirely. Something hungry. I'd been working as the night janitor at Carlton and Associates for about 6 months when the weird stuff started happening. The building itself was nothing special. 12 floors of cubicles, conference rooms, and corner offices, all wrapped in glass and steel. My job was simple: clean the bathrooms, vacuum the carpets, empty the trash. Basic stuff that kept me busy from midnight until dawn. The first incident was so small I almost missed it. I'd left my cleaning cart by the elevators while I restocked paper towels in the 4th floor bathroom. When I came back, my bottle of glass cleaner had moved from one side of the cart to the other. Not fallen over, not knocked aside, moved deliberately, as if someone had picked it up and placed it there. I brushed it off as forgetfulness. When you work alone at night, it's easy to second-guess yourself. Maybe I'd moved it earlier and forgot. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. But then it happened again the next night with a roll of paper towels, and the night after that with my phone. Small things, easily explained away, except they kept happening, and always when my back was turned. I'd finish mopping a floor, turn around to rinse the mop, and find my bucket had shifted 3 feet to the left. I'd set down my cleaning supplies to unlock a door, and they'd be in a different arrangement when I looked back. Then I started hearing things. Not the usual nighttime building sounds. The hum of the ventilation system, the occasional pop of settling metal, the distant rumble of late-night traffic. These were different. Shuffling sounds, like something being dragged across carpet. Soft thumping noises that seemed to follow me from room to room. And sometimes, when I was alone in a large open space, I'd hear what sounded like breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that wasn't my own. I started keeping track of my supplies, laying them out in specific patterns so I'd know if they moved. I took photos with my phone, documenting their positions before and after I turned my back. The changes were subtle but undeniable. A spray bottle rotated 45 degrees, a dust mop leaning the opposite way. Small things, but impossible things. One night, while cleaning the executive floor, I caught something in my peripheral vision. A shadow moving across the carpet, low to the ground, like someone crawling. When I turned to look, nothing was there. But when I checked my cart, everything had been rearranged again. I tried telling my supervisor, but how do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? Hey boss, I think something's messing with my cleaning supplies when I'm not looking. He'd probably think I was drinking on the job or looking for an excuse to quit. So I kept quiet and started setting up my phone to record while I worked. The first few nights caught nothing, just me moving from room to room, the occasional flicker of shadows as clouds passed over the moonlight outside. But then, on the 5th night, I caught something. I was cleaning the break room on the 7th floor when my phone captured it. In the video, you can see me wiping down the counters, my back to the door. Then something moves in the hallway. A dark shape, low to the ground, moving in a way that's not quite right. It's like watching someone crawl, but the movements are too fluid, too smooth. The shape slides into the room just at the edge of the frame, and then the video cuts to static for 3 seconds. When it clears, my cleaning supplies have been completely rearranged, and there's no sign of the shape. I watched that video 100 times, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a camera malfunction. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. Something was in the building with me. Something that waited until I wasn't looking. Something that moved in ways that weren't natural. After that, things escalated. I'd hear the shuffling sounds closer now, almost right behind me. Sometimes I'd feel a cold draft brush past my legs, like something had just crawled by. The rearranging of my supplies became more dramatic. Items would be turned upside down or stacked in impossible ways. Then came the night that changed everything. I was vacuuming the 10th floor when the power went out. Not just the lights, everything. The vacuum died. The emergency lights didn't kick in. Even my phone went dead. I stood in complete darkness, trying to get my bearings when I heard it. The shuffling sound was all around me now, circling. I could hear breathing, that same slow, deliberate breathing I'd heard before, but louder, closer. And then I saw them. Eyes, reflecting what little light came through the windows. They were low to the ground, moving in the darkness, and there were too many of them. Far too many. I ran. I didn't care about my cart or my supplies or my job. I just ran, fumbling through the darkness toward where I thought the stairs were. Behind me, I could hear it moving, not running, but sliding across the floor with that unnatural smoothness, keeping pace without effort. I hit the stairwell door harder than I meant to, nearly falling down the first flight of stairs. As I ran down, I could hear it in the stairwell with me. Not on the stairs, but on the walls. Moving alongside me, parallel to the ground as if gravity didn't apply to it. I burst out of the stairwell on the ground floor, sprinting for the main entrance. Just as I reached the doors, the lights came back on. I turned around, heart pounding, dreading what I might see. The lobby was empty. No shape, no eyes, nothing crawling on the walls. But my cleaning cart was there, right in the middle of the floor. Every single supply had been arranged in a perfect circle, and in the center was a single piece of paper. Written on it in handwriting that looked like it had been done by someone who had only ever seen letters in a mirror were the words, "We've been watching you clean. Now it's your turn to watch us." I left everything there, the cart, the supplies, my keys to the building. I walked out and never went back. Sent my resignation by email the next day. Found a new job working days at a small office where nothing ever moves when I'm not looking. But sometimes late at night when I'm home alone, I'll hear that shuffling sound. Or I'll catch a glimpse of something moving low to the ground in my peripheral vision. And I'll know they followed me home. The watchers. The crawlers. The things that wait until you turn your back. I've learned to live with it mostly. I keep my cleaning supplies locked away now. Can't stand to see them moved around anymore. I've covered all the mirrors in my house because sometimes, just sometimes, I'll catch a reflection of something moving behind me. Something that crawls in ways that shouldn't be possible. Every building has its own personality after dark, they say. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes that personality follows you home. Sometimes it watches you, studies you, learns from you. And sometimes when you least expect it, it reminds you that you're never really alone. Because they're still watching, still waiting, still crawling in the darkness just beyond your sight. And every now and then, when I'm about to fall asleep, I'll hear that soft shuffling sound, feel that cold draft across my legs, and know that they're still there, still watching, still learning, forever crawling in the spaces where we dare not look. I don't clean anymore. Can't handle the thought of turning my back on an empty room. But I know they're out there, in office buildings and schools and hospitals, waiting for the lights to go out, waiting for someone new to watch. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I wonder if they've found someone new to study, or if I'll always be their favorite subject, the janitor who saw too much, who learned what really happens when you turn your back on the darkness. Because that's the thing about darkness. It's not empty. It's full of watching eyes and crawling shapes and things that move in ways they shouldn't. And once you know that, you can never unknow it. You can only watch and wait and pray they don't decide to do more than just rearrange your cleaning supplies. A lost suitcase tells a story. It might be as simple as a traveler's forgetfulness or as complex as a life suddenly abandoned. But the red roller bag I found near the emergency exit that night, that was different. It wasn't lost. It was waiting for me to find it. I'd been working nights at Riverside Airport for 8 months. It wasn't a busy place, just a small regional airport serving a handful of late flights and cargo planes. My job was simple: patrol the terminals, check the security doors, and make sure nobody was where they shouldn't be. Most nights passed without incident, just me and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. The suitcase appeared on a Tuesday. It was tucked away in a corner near one of the ground floor emergency exits, partially hidden behind a trash bin. At first glance, it looked like any other forgotten luggage, a bit beat up, well-traveled, nothing special. But there was something odd about the way it was positioned, almost deliberately placed like someone had carefully chosen that exact spot. I approached it cautiously. These days you can't be too careful with abandoned bags in airports. But my gut told me this wasn't a security threat. This was something else. When I checked for identification tags, I found nothing. No name, no address, no airline tags. Just a plain red suitcase with worn edges and a slightly crooked wheel. Following protocol, I took it to the lost and found office. That's when things got weird. Inside, there was only one item, a teddy bear. Not just any teddy bear, but an ancient, threadbare thing with one button eye barely hanging on. It looked like something that had been loved for decades, carried through countless adventures and heartbreaks. I logged it into the system and tried to forget about it. But the next night, there was another suitcase in exactly the same spot. This one was green, smaller, covered in scratches like it had been dragged through gravel. Again, no identification. Again, I took it to Lost and Found. Inside was a single child's sneaker. Just one. It was caked with mud and looked like it had been through hell. Something about that lonely shoe made my skin crawl. Why just one? Where was its pair? And why leave it here, in this specific spot? The third night, I almost didn't want to check that corner. But of course, there it was. Another suitcase. This one was different. An old leather case with a broken clasp. Inside was a black and white photograph of a little girl standing alone in what looked like a backyard. The expression on her face, it wasn't right. Too blank, too empty. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. I started dreading my shifts. Each night brought a new suitcase, each one containing a single item that seemed deliberately chosen to unsettle me. A rusty key with no lock, a handwritten note in a language I didn't recognize, a small mirror that only reflected darkness. I checked the security cameras, but they showed nothing. No one dropping off the suitcases, no suspicious activity. It was as if they materialized out of thin air, appearing in that same spot between my rounds. Then one night, around 2 a.m., I saw someone. A figure standing outside near the drop-off curb, partially illuminated by the dim parking lot lights. They were wearing a dark coat, their face hidden beneath a hood, and they were carrying a suitcase. I watched through the glass doors as they approached. They stopped just outside, looking in as if checking for something. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay hidden, watching. They set the suitcase down carefully, almost reverently, and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I waited until I was sure they were gone before approaching the bag. My hands were trembling as I carried it to the Lost and Found office. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper with 4 words written in messy handwriting. "It's your turn now." The next night I came prepared. I set up my phone to record the corner where the suitcases appeared. I did extra rounds, checked every shadow, determined to catch whoever was behind this. But somehow, when I wasn't looking, another suitcase appeared. This one contained a mirror, but not just any mirror. When I looked into it, I saw my own reflection, but something was wrong. My eyes looked hollow, empty, like the little girl in the photograph. I dropped the mirror back into the suitcase and slammed it shut. The suitcases kept coming, night after night, each one more disturbing than the last. A child's diary with only one sentence written on every page. "They're watching." A set of keys that matched the locks in my apartment. A recent photograph of me sleeping in my bed. That's when I knew. This wasn't random. Whoever was leaving these suitcases knew me, had been watching me, had been in my home. The items weren't just creepy trinkets. They were messages, warnings. One night I heard shuffling outside the Lost and Found office. When I looked out, there was a line of suitcases in the hallway, all different sizes and colors, arranged in a perfect row leading to the emergency exit. As I watched, the last suitcase in line slowly opened by itself. Inside was a mirror, and in its reflection I saw them. Dozens of figures standing behind me, all wearing dark coats, all faceless. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, they were still there, watching, waiting. I ran, left everything behind. My jacket, my keys, my pride. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and even then I felt watched. When I got home, there was a suitcase waiting on my front porch. I didn't open it. Didn't want to know what message it contained. I quit my job the next day, moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number. But sometimes, I still find them. Small suitcases left in strange places. Outside my window, in my building's laundry room, under my desk at my new job. Always containing a single item. Always telling a story I don't want to hear. Last week I found one in my closet. A tiny red suitcase I know I didn't put there. I haven't opened it. Can't bring myself to see what's inside. It sits there now, waiting, whispering in the darkness. Because that's what they do, these suitcases. They wait. They whisper. They tell stories about watching eyes and empty faces and things that follow you home in the night. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be free of them, or if this is my life now. Finding mysterious suitcases, each one a chapter in a story I never wanted to be part of. A story about being watched, being chosen, being marked. The thing about lost suitcases is that they all tell a story. But some stories don't end. Some stories follow you, haunt you, change you. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I swear I can hear them. The soft scrape of wheels on hardwood, the gentle click of latches, the whisper of stories waiting to be told. Because they're still out there, those suitcase deliverers, still watching, still waiting, still leaving their messages in the dark corners of my world. And somewhere in a corner I haven't checked yet, another suitcase is waiting. Another story is ready to be told. Another piece of my sanity ready to be claimed by whatever watches from the shadows. Always watching. Always waiting. Always collecting stories in forgotten suitcases. Two months into working security at the downtown parking garage, I realized something. Footsteps echo differently when they're not your own. There's a distinct pattern to a person's walk, a rhythm you can recognize. But the footsteps I started hearing on level 3, they didn't sound human at all. The garage itself was nothing special. 5 levels of concrete and fluorescent lighting, mostly empty after midnight except for the occasional late-night worker or theater goer. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights were spent doing rounds, checking cameras and making sure no one was breaking into cars. The booth I worked from was small but comfortable, with a bank of monitors showing feeds from security cameras scattered throughout the garage. The cameras weren't great, lots of blind spots and grainy footage, but they were better than nothing. At least that's what I thought before the footsteps started. I first heard them during a routine patrol of level 3. It was around 2 a.m., that dead time of night when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The sound came from somewhere behind me. Steady, measured steps that seemed to follow my own but weren't quite in sync. I turned around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but the level was empty. Just rows of parked cars and concrete pillars casting long shadows. I stood there for a moment listening, but the steps had stopped. Probably just an echo, I told myself. Sound plays tricks in places like this. But the next night, they were back. Same level, same time, same unsettling rhythm. This time they seemed closer, more distinct. When I turned to look, I caught a glimpse of movement between the cars. Just a shadow, really, but enough to make my heart race. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Security. Anyone there?" No response. Just the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I did a thorough sweep of the level, checking between every car, but found nothing. Back in my booth, I reviewed the security footage. The cameras on level 3 showed nothing unusual. Just me walking my rounds, stopping, looking around. But there was something odd about the footage. Every now and then, the screen would flicker slightly, like there was interference. And in those moments, I swore I could see something moving in the background, just at the edge of the frame. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence, always on level 3, always around 2 a.m. Sometimes they'd follow me for just a few minutes. Other times they'd echo through the entire level for hours. I started dreading that part of my rounds, but I couldn't skip it. It was my job to check every level. One night, determined to catch whoever was messing with me, I turned off my flashlight and waited in the shadows. The garage was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. Then I heard it. Footsteps, coming from the ramp leading up from level 2. They were different this time, slower and more deliberate, like whoever was making them wanted me to hear. I held my breath, watching the ramp, waiting to see who would appear. Nothing did. The footsteps reached the top of the ramp, but there was no one there. They continued across the level, passing right by my hiding spot, but I couldn't see anyone making them. Just the sound of feet on concrete, moving through empty air. I broke that night, ran back to my booth and locked the door, hands shaking as I tried to call my supervisor. But the phone line was dead, and my cell phone showed no signal. On the security monitors, I could see level 3, still empty, still quiet. Then I saw it. The cameras started flickering one by one, static washing across the screens. As they cleared, I noticed something in the footage. A figure, standing perfectly still in the middle of level 3. It was dark and slightly blurred, like a shadow that had somehow pulled itself away from the wall. As I watched, it turned to face the camera. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew it was looking at me. Somehow through the grainy footage and the flickering screen, I could feel its gaze. The figure raised one hand, beckoning. All the monitors went black. When they came back on a few seconds later, the figure was gone. But the footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them now, echoing up the stairwell next to my booth. Slow, measured steps, coming up from level 3. I sat there paralyzed as they got closer and closer. The door handle started to turn, slowly, deliberately. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. The door opened. The stairwell beyond was empty, but the footsteps continued. They entered the booth, circling my chair. I could feel a presence behind me, cold and ancient and wrong. Something touched my shoulder, not a hand, but something that felt like one trying to remember how to be a hand. "We've been watching you," a voice whispered, though I couldn't tell if I heard it with my ears or in my head. "Learning your patterns, your routines, your fears." I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. When I opened them again, the presence was gone. The footsteps retreated down the stairwell, fading back to level 3. I quit that night, left my badge on the desk and walked out. Didn't even wait for my replacement to arrive. As I hurried to my car, I could hear the footsteps following me, matching my pace step for step all the way to the exit. That was 3 months ago. I have a new job now, working days at a small office where the only footsteps I hear belong to my coworkers. But sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed, I hear them. Those measured, deliberate steps, moving through my apartment like they're still learning, still watching, still following. I've learned to live with it mostly. I've accepted that whatever was in that garage followed me home. Sometimes I catch glimpses of it in mirrors or windows. That dark, blurred figure, still watching, still learning, still trying to understand what it means to be human. The footsteps never stop completely. They're quieter now, more distant, but always there. Following me through grocery stores, down city streets, through empty corridors, learning my new patterns, my new routines. Last week, I saw someone new working security at the garage. Young guy, probably his first night job. As I drove past, I caught a glimpse of level 3 in my rearview mirror. There was a figure standing there, dark and blurred, watching the new guard make his rounds. I wanted to warn him. Wanted to tell him about the footsteps, about the figure in the cameras, about the thing that follows you home. But who would believe me? So I drive past the garage every day, wondering if the new guard has heard them yet. The footsteps that don't sound quite human. The presence that watches and learns and follows. Because that's what they do. They watch. They learn, they follow. And somewhere in that garage on level 3 around 2 a.m., the footsteps continue. It started with a paper cut. At least that's what he claimed it was. But paper cuts don't usually make people come to the ER at 3 in the morning, and they certainly don't bring them back night after night, staring at you with eyes that never seem to blink. I'd been working nights at St. Mary's Hospital for almost 2 years. As an ER nurse, I'd seen it all. The drunk teenagers, the hypochondriacs, the genuinely sick and injured. You develop a kind of sixth sense about patients, learn to read the subtle signs that tell you whether someone's really hurting or just seeking attention. Derek was different from the start. He came in on a quiet Tuesday night, holding his arm awkwardly against his chest. Tall, maybe late 30s, with this intense look that made me uncomfortable even before he spoke. The cut was superficial, barely worth a band-aid, but he insisted on being seen. "It might be infected," he said, his eyes never leaving my face as I cleaned the wound. "I've been watching it carefully." Something about the way he said watching made my skin crawl. I finished dressing the cut quickly, trying to maintain professional distance despite the way he kept leaning in slightly too close. "You have gentle hands," he murmured as I taped the gauze. "Very precise. I like that." I smiled politely and stepped back, creating space between us. "You're all set. Keep it clean and dry and you should be fine." He didn't move to leave, just sat there staring at me with those unblinking eyes. "Will you be here tomorrow night?" "Sir, you won't need to come back for this. It's a minor cut." His smile didn't reach his eyes. You never know. Things can get worse so quickly. The next night, he was back, this time with a small bruise on his forehead. "I fell," he explained, though the mark looked more like someone had pressed their thumb deliberately against his skin. I wanted to make sure it wasn't serious. I called Dr. Matthews to examine him, not wanting to be alone in the room with him again. As the doctor checked his pupils, Derek's eyes stayed fixed on me, standing in the doorway. "Everything looks fine," Dr. Matthews concluded. "No sign of concussion." "Are you sure?" Derek asked. "Maybe I should stay for observation." Nurse Emma could watch me. My heart skipped. I hadn't told him my name, and my badge was turned backward, a habit I'd developed during night shifts. The visits continued, each with a new minor injury that any rational person would have treated at home. A scraped knee, a stubbed toe, a paper cut on his other hand. Each time he stayed longer, talked more, watched me with those intense eyes that seemed to memorize every movement. "You look tired tonight, Emma," he said during one visit. "Those late shifts must be hard, but I like seeing you here. It's peaceful, just us in the quiet." I started dreading my shifts, knowing he might appear at any moment. I varied my break times, took different routes through the hospital, asked other nurses to take him when he came in, but he always found me, always knew where I would be. One night, around 2 a.m., I was restocking supplies in a quiet corner of the ER when I heard his voice behind me. "I missed you last night." I spun around. He was standing closer than he should have been able to get without me hearing him approach. "You weren't working," he continued. "I waited, but you never came." "How did you get back here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is a staff-only area." He smiled that empty smile. "I watch you, Emma. I know all your routines. Where you take your breaks, which halls you use, when you like to do your paperwork. I even know about that little coffee shop you stop at before your shift, the one on 5th Street. My blood ran cold. I'd never mentioned that coffee shop to anyone at work. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "This area is restricted. I'm calling security." "They won't understand," he said, taking a step closer. "No one understands what we have. I've been watching you for so long, learning everything about you. We're connected now." I backed away, reaching for my phone. "There is no we. You're my patient, nothing more. This needs to stop." His expression darkened. "You don't mean that. You're just scared. Everyone gets scared at first. but then they understand. You will too. I turned to run, but he grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron in his eyes. His eyes were different now, wild and hungry. Let go, I warned, though my voice shook. I can't, he whispered. Don't you see? I need to watch you. Need to be close to you. Need to. Code Gray, I shouted, the hospital signal for a violent patient. Code Gray in the East Wing. He released me just as security rounded the corner. As they approached, his face transformed into a mask of confused innocence. I got lost looking for the bathroom, he told them, holding up his hands. The nurse was just giving me directions. They escorted him out, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole way, that hungry stare that seemed to strip away all my defenses. I filed a report that night, told my supervisor everything. They banned him from the hospital except for genuine emergencies, increased security on my floor, made sure I was never alone during my shifts. But it didn't stop him. He started showing up outside the hospital, watching from across the street. I'd catch glimpses of him in the parking lot, standing under streetlights, always staring up at the ER windows. Sometimes I'd find notes on my car, little observations about my day, things he'd seen while watching me. You looked beautiful in that blue sweater today. Your cat seems lonely when you're gone. You should really fix that flickering porch light. Each note proved he was watching, learning, getting closer. The police said they couldn't do much. He hadn't actually threatened me, hadn't broken any laws. They told me to document everything, to vary my routine, to stay aware of my surroundings. But how do you vary your routine when someone has been watching long enough to learn all your alternatives? How do you hide from eyes that seem to be everywhere? I transferred to day shift, changed my parking spot, even moved to a new apartment. But he always found me, always watched, always knew. Last week I found a gift-wrapped box on my doorstep. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures of me, at work, at home, shopping, walking my cat. Some were from months ago, others from just days before. On the last page was a note. I'll always be watching, Emma, always learning, always knowing. We're connected now, forever. I quit my job at the hospital after that. Moved to a different city, changed my name, started over. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I catch a glimpse of someone watching me through windows or across crowded streets. Someone tall, with intense eyes that never seem to blink. And I know he's still there, still watching, still learning, still waiting. Because that's what he does. That's who he is. A watcher, a learner, a patient who never really leaves. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be free of those eyes, ever escape the weight of his endless watching. But deep down I know the truth. He'll always be there in shadows and reflections, in quiet corners and empty rooms. Radio waves travel through darkness differently than light. They bounce off buildings, slip through walls, carry voices to places they were never meant to reach. But the voice that started calling my late-night show, it wasn't traveling through any frequency I recognized. It was coming from somewhere much closer. I'd been the midnight DJ at WKRX for 3 years. Small station, barely a blip on the radio landscape, but it had its loyal listeners, insomniacs, truckers, night shift workers looking for company in the dark hours. Most nights, I'd get 2 or 3 calls, usually requesting songs or just wanting to chat. Nothing extraordinary, until he started calling. The first time it was around 1 a.m. I had just finished playing a block of classic rock and was about to start the next set when the phone lit up. I didn't think anything of it at first, just another late-night caller. WKRX, you're on with Jack. What can I play for you tonight? There was a pause, just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then a voice, low and calm, with an odd echo quality I attributed to the phone line. You look tired tonight, Jack. I froze. The studio was on the 3rd floor of an empty office building. No windows faced the street, and the only way to see me would be from inside the building itself. Excuse me? I managed to say. Those energy drinks aren't helping much, are they? I can see 3 empty cans on your desk. My eyes darted to the empty Red Bulls lined up next to my coffee mug. My heart started racing. Who is this? How can you... The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. There was no way anyone could see into the studio. The building was locked after hours, and I was the only one with access to this floor. I told myself it must have been a lucky guess. Lots of late-night DJs rely on energy drinks. But he called again the next night. That's a nice blue shirt you're wearing. Brings out your eyes. I was wearing blue. Again, he knew exactly what I looked like, what I was doing, even though I was alone in a locked building. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know how you're doing this, but it needs to stop. Why would I stop? He asked, sounding genuinely confused. I enjoy watching you work. The way you move to the music when you think no one's looking. The way you talk to yourself between songs. The way you keep glancing over your shoulder, like you can feel me here. Click. I called security, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no one on the cameras. Just empty hallways and locked doors. The calls kept coming, every night around the same time. He knew everything. What I was wearing, what I was doing, even things I'd done earlier in the day. That sandwich you had for lunch didn't look very fresh. The corner store really should check their expiration dates. Your car's almost out of gas. You should fill up on your way home. You really should call your mother back. She's worried about you. Each call revealed more details about my life, things he couldn't possibly know unless he was watching me constantly. But how? The studio had no windows, the security cameras showed nothing, and the building was always empty. I started changing my routine, varying my break times, parking in different spots. But it didn't matter. He always knew where I was, what I was doing. One night, after a particularly unsettling call where he described the contents of my apartment in detail, I decided to search the studio. I checked every corner, looked behind every piece of equipment, searching for hidden cameras or microphones. That's when I found it. A small gap in the acoustic padding, just wide enough to see through. And behind it, an old maintenance shaft that ran the height of the building. As I shone my flashlight into the darkness, I could see cables and pipes running up and down, creating a perfect ladder system. Someone could climb up there. Someone could watch through that gap. The phone rang. My hand shaking, I picked it up. You found my hiding place, he said, his voice closer now, no longer coming through the phone. I was wondering when you would. I spun around, but the studio was empty. Where are you? I demanded. Everywhere, he whispered. In the walls, in the ceiling, in the spaces between spaces. I've been here so long, Jack, watching, learning, understanding. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but something was blocking it from the other side. You can't leave, he said, his voice now coming from somewhere in the walls. Not yet. I haven't finished watching. I could hear movement in the maintenance shaft, something sliding through the darkness. The lights in the studio began to flicker. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because you're interesting, he replied. The way you talk to your listeners, the way you move, the way you live. I want to understand it all, want to learn everything about you. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, I could hear him moving closer, emerging from his hiding place. Don't you want to meet me, Jack? Don't you want to see what I've become after watching you for so long? I fumbled for my phone, trying to call for help, but there was no signal. The studio was silent except for the sound of something approaching in the dark. That's when the emergency lights kicked in, filling the room with a dim red glow. He was standing there just a few feet away, a tall, thin figure in dark clothes, his face hidden in shadow. But his eyes were visible, reflecting the red light like a cat's. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, gesturing to the studio. This little world you've created here. Your music, your voice, your life. I've watched it all, learned it all, become part of it all. I backed away until I hit the wall. What do you want? To share, he whispered, stepping closer. To show you what I've learned. To teach you how to watch like I do. I closed my eyes, praying this was just a nightmare. When I opened them, he was gone. The lights came back on, the door unlocked with a click, and I was alone in the studio. I quit that night, left everything, my headphones, my music library, my career. Called my boss from my car and told him I was done. Found a new job in a different city, working days where everything is visible and nothing hides in the walls. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a familiar voice on the radio. Not speaking, just breathing, waiting. And I know he's still out there, still watching, still learning, because that's what he does. He watches, he learns, he understands. And somewhere in that old building, in the spaces between spaces, he's still there. Still watching, still waiting for someone new to study. I don't listen to the radio anymore. Can't stand the thought of those voices traveling through the darkness, carrying messages I don't want to hear. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I swear I can hear him breathing through my walls, watching me through gaps I can't see. Always watching, always learning, always waiting. Time moves differently in a 24-hour laundromat. Between the hypnotic tumble of clothes and the steady hum of fluorescent lights, minutes stretch into hours, and reality starts to blur at the edges. That's probably why it took me so long to realize something was wrong about the man who never did any laundry. My shift ran from midnight to 8, and most nights were quiet. Just me, the machines, and the occasional insomniac washing their sheets at 3 a.m. The place wasn't fancy. Just rows of washers and dryers, a few plastic chairs, and windows that reflected more than they revealed after dark. But it paid the bills, and I liked the solitude. He started coming in on Tuesdays, always after midnight, always dressed in the same worn coat that seemed to hang off his frame like it belonged to someone else. He never brought laundry, never touched a machine. He just sat in the back row of chairs, watching. At first, I didn't think much of it. Working nights, you get all types. People seeking warmth, people avoiding home, people just needing somewhere to exist for a while. But there was something about the way he watched that made my skin crawl. His eyes never seemed to blink, and they followed my every movement like a predator tracking prey. After a few weeks, I noticed a pattern. He'd arrive precisely at 12:15, sit in the exact same chair, and stay until just before my shift ended. Never spoke, never moved, just watched. Even when I was doing the most mundane tasks, refilling soap dispensers, wiping down machines, his gaze remained fixed, intense, studying. I started feeling trapped during my shifts. The laundromat's bright interior turned the windows into mirrors after dark, and I'd catch glimpses of him in every reflection. Sometimes I'd see him shift positions in the glass, but when I turned around, he'd be sitting exactly as before, motionless. One night, I decided to confront him. I was tired of feeling like an exhibit in some twisted museum. "Excuse me," I said, approaching his corner. "You can't just sit here without doing laundry." He looked up at me, and his expression made my blood run cold. There was nothing behind those eyes. No emotion, no humanity, just empty space looking back. "I know where you live," he said softly, his voice smooth and quiet. "That little house on Maple Street, the one with the blue shutters." My heart stopped. I'd never mentioned where I lived to anyone at work, made a point of being vague about personal details. "Your cat," he continued, smiling slightly. "The gray one. I see it sometimes when you come home from work." I backed away, my hands shaking. "How do you know that?" "I just like to watch you," he said, tilting his head like a curious bird. "You work hard. It's fascinating." I turned and walked quickly back to the counter, my mind racing. I needed to call someone, the police, my manager, anyone, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. He just sat there, that same empty smile on his face. The next night he was back, and the night after that. Each time, he revealed more details about my life. where I shopped, what I ate, when I slept. It was like he was cataloging every aspect of my existence, creating a database of my habits and routines. One night, I heard footsteps behind me while I was cleaning the dryers. I turned to find him standing there, much closer than he'd ever been before. Up close, I could see that his coat wasn't just worn. It was filthy, like it hadn't been washed in months. "You should be careful," he whispered, leaning in slightly. "There are worse people than me out there." I backed away, reaching for my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," he said, unfazed. "I'll be here when you get back." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to explain the situation, but my voice kept cracking. They said they'd send someone, but it would take time. I locked myself in the back office, watching through the window as he returned to his chair. He sat there, perfectly still, staring at the office door like he knew exactly where I was hiding. I could feel his gaze through the walls, through the glass, through my skin. When the police finally arrived, they found him still sitting there. He spoke to them calmly but gave them a false name and disappeared before they could verify it. They told me to call again if he came back, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. After all, what crime had he committed? Sitting? Watching? The next day, I quit. I couldn't face another night of being studied like a specimen under a microscope. But leaving the laundromat didn't end it. I started seeing him everywhere, in crowds, at stoplights, through my kitchen window at night, always watching, always studying, always learning my patterns. I moved to a new apartment, changed my schedule, took different routes to work. But somehow, he always found me. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of that dirty coat disappearing around a corner, or see those empty eyes reflecting streetlights in my rearview mirror. Last week, I found a note taped to my door. "I miss watching you work. The new girl isn't nearly as interesting. She doesn't move the way you do, doesn't care about the details like you did. But don't worry, I still watch you. I'll always watch you. I don't do laundry at night anymore. Can't stand the sound of machines tumbling in the dark, the way fluorescent lights turn windows into mirrors. But sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I swear I can feel those eyes on me, studying, learning, cataloging every moment of my existence. Because that's what he does. He watches. He learns. He remembers. And somewhere out there, in some other late-night laundromat, he's sitting in the back row watching someone new, learning their patterns, memorizing their lives. I keep trying to forget what happened at that old hotel last month, but I can't get it out of my head. I've been doing construction and renovation work for years, and weird stuff happens on night shifts all the time. Old buildings make noise, shadows play tricks on you, whatever. But this was different. This was something else entirely, and I still can't explain it. I was doing prep work at this abandoned hotel downtown. You know, one of those fancy old places from like the 1930s that's been sitting empty forever. The company I work for got contracted to gut it and turn it into apartments or something. That night, I was supposed to strip some walls and clear debris, getting things ready for the demo crew in the morning. I'd done plenty of solo night shifts before, so being alone in the building didn't really bother me at first. Yeah, it was creepy. Most of the power was out except for our work lights, and the place was huge with these endless dark hallways and rooms full of old furniture covered in sheets. But I had my headphones in, just focusing on getting the job done. Around 1 a.m., I was hauling some debris down to the basement when I heard someone call my name, like crystal clear, right behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin because I knew I was the only one there. I'd locked up myself when the day crew left. I pulled out my headphones and called out, but nobody answered. Just silence and that weird echo you get in empty buildings. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just my music playing tricks on me or something. But then it happened again, and this time I wasn't wearing headphones. Just my name, clear as day, like someone was standing right next to me. And here's the really messed up part. I started noticing my tools weren't where I left them. I know how that sounds, but I'm dead serious. I'd put my hammer down to move some stuff, turn around, and it would be gone. Then I'd find it somewhere completely different, like on the other side of the basement. This wasn't me being forgetful. I've been doing this job for 12 years and I always keep track of my tools. But they kept moving when I wasn't looking. The worst was when my whole toolbox disappeared. I had it right by the stairs. I specifically remember putting it there because I'd just used my pry bar to pull up some old trim. I turned away for maybe 2 minutes to stack some boards, and when I looked back, it was just gone. I found it in the middle of the basement floor, but all my tools had been taken out and arranged in this perfect circle. I'm not kidding. Every screwdriver, wrench, and hammer laid out in a perfect ring on the concrete. By this point, I was seriously freaking out. That voice kept calling my name, getting closer and closer each time. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from right behind me, sometimes from down the hall, sometimes from inside the walls. And the whole time, I had this horrible feeling of being watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? Like that, but 100 times worse. The motion sensor lights we'd set up kept triggering, but there was never anyone there. Just empty hallways and doorways, but the lights would follow me like something was walking just a few steps behind. I kept spinning around, trying to catch whatever was setting them off, but there was never anything there. Just darkness beyond the circle of light. Around 3 a.m., things got even weirder. I'd left my ladder leaning against the wall near the main stairwell. I remember this specifically because I'd just used it to check some wiring in the ceiling. When I came back, it was lying flat in the middle of the hallway, blocking the path to the exit. Not fallen over, but laid down perfectly straight like someone had deliberately placed it there. I started heading for the door. Figured I'd just come back in the morning when everyone else was there. But when I tried to leave, the voice got louder. It wasn't just my name anymore. It started saying things like, "I see you," and "Don't leave yet." Not in a scary movie voice or anything, but in this completely normal conversational tone that somehow made it even worse. The breaking point was when I heard footsteps running upstairs, clear as day, like someone sprinting back and forth above me. But I was on the top floor. There wasn't supposed to be anything above me except the roof. That's when I completely lost it. I dropped everything and ran. Didn't even bother grabbing my stuff, just got the hell out of there. The really messed up thing is what happened to my phone. I had been trying to record some of the weird noises to show my supervisor why I was freaking out, but when I checked later, there was nothing on the recordings. Just static and this weird humming sound. But here's the thing. I can hear my own voice on the recordings, talking and reacting to things that aren't there in the playback. I quit the next day. Didn't even go back for my tools. Told them to mail my last check. My supervisor probably thinks I'm crazy or was drunk or something, but I don't care. I know what I experienced, and I know something was in that building with me. The weirdest part? Nothing like this ever happened during the day. Other guys worked in that same building for weeks with no problems. It was just that one night, just when I was alone. Like whatever was there was waiting for the right moment. I still do construction work, but never alone, and never at night. Sometimes I drive past that hotel, they're still renovating it, and I swear I can see movement in the windows of the top floor. Probably just reflections or something, but I don't know. I know this all sounds insane. Trust me, if someone had told me this story before it happened, I would have thought they were making it up. But I know what I heard that night. I know what I saw, and I know that something in that building knew my name and wanted me to know it was watching me. I still can't explain any of it. Why me? Why that night? What was moving my tools, and how did it know my name? Sometimes I think about going back during the day, just to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But then I remember that voice, and those footsteps on the non-existent floor above me, and I realize I don't want answers. I don't want to know what was in there with me that night. This is the first time I've told anyone about this. My wife knows I quit that job suddenly, but I've never told her why. How do you even begin to explain something like this without sounding completely insane? All I know is something was in that building with me that night. Something that knew my name. Something that wanted me to know it was there. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working in my garage, I'll turn around to grab a tool and find it's not where I left it. Probably just my imagination now, but I always make sure to put everything away and lock the door before dark, just in case. Security cameras don't show everything. That's the first thing they teach you in mall security training. There are always blind spots, dead zones where anything could happen without being recorded. But what the cameras caught that night in the food court, sometimes I wish they hadn't caught anything at all. I'd been working security at Riverwood Mall for about 2 years. Night shift wasn't exactly exciting, just walking rounds, checking doors, making sure no one broke in after hours. The mall itself was one of those older ones, 3 levels of retail space wrapped around a central food court, with long corridors that seemed to stretch forever in the dim emergency lighting. Most nights were quiet. Sometimes we'd get teens trying to sneak in or homeless people looking for shelter, but nothing serious. The emptiness became almost peaceful after a while. Just me, my flashlight, and the gentle hum of the ventilation system. That night started like any other. I was doing my 2 a.m. round, walking through the dark food court, when I noticed her. A woman standing near the shuttered Cinnabon, just staring. She was wearing a dark dress that seemed to absorb what little light there was, and her hair hung long and straight down her back. Protocol said I should approach and ask her to leave. The mall had been closed for hours. But something about the way she stood there, perfectly still, made me hesitate. The air felt different, heavier somehow, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Ma'am?" I called out, trying to keep my voice professional. "The mall is closed. You'll need to leave." She turned, slowly, and I felt my blood freeze. Her face was wrong somehow. Not disfigured or monstrous, just wrong. Like someone had tried to remember what a face should look like but couldn't quite get the details right. "We're connected," she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly across the empty space. "I've been watching you, learning you." I reached for my radio, but my hand was shaking. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to call the police if you don't leave now." She smiled, and that was wrong too. Too wide, too many teeth. "The police can't help you. No one can. I've chosen you." She began walking toward me, her movements smooth but somehow off, like watching a video played at slightly the wrong speed. I backed away, finally getting my radio to my mouth. "Control, I need backup in the food court. Possible 1096. Static answered me. Just white noise and a faint whisper that might have been my name. The woman was closer now, still smiling that impossible smile. "You're so interesting when you think you're alone. The way you move, the way you watch, the way you exist in these empty spaces, I want to understand it all." I turned and ran. Professional pride be damned. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away. My footsteps echoed off the walls as I sprinted toward the security office, but I could hear her behind me, moving at that same steady pace, never rushing, but somehow keeping up. The security office was my sanctuary. Reinforced door, multiple cameras, direct line to the police. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, then turned to the monitors to see where she was. The cameras showed nothing, just empty corridors and the dark food court. But I could hear her walking somewhere in the darkness, getting closer. I called the police, my voice shaking as I tried to explain. They said they'd send someone, but I could hear the skepticism in the dispatcher's voice. Just another security guard spooked by shadows. The monitors flickered, static washing across the screens. When they cleared, she was there, standing right outside my door, staring directly into the camera. Her face was clearer now, and I realized what had been bothering me about it. It wasn't just wrong, it was my face. Or something trying to be my face, stretched over features that weren't meant to wear it. "Let me in," she said, her voice coming through both the door and my radio. "Let me learn you completely." "Stay back," I warned, though my voice cracked. "Police are on their way." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "They won't see me, they never do. Only you can see me, because we're connected now. I've been watching you for so long, learning everything about you. How you walk your rounds, how you talk to yourself when you think you're alone, how you check the same door twice because you can't remember if you locked it." The lights in the office began to flicker, and the temperature dropped so rapidly I could see my breath. The door handle started to turn slowly, even though I knew I'd locked it. "No one will believe you," she continued. "They'll think you imagined me. But you know I'm real. You know I've chosen you. And now, you'll learn to watch like I do." The door opened. I don't remember much after that. The police found me hours later, curled up in the corner of the office. The security footage showed nothing, just me, running from empty air, locking myself in the office, screaming at nothing. I quit that night. Couldn't face going back into those dark corridors, knowing she might be watching. But leaving didn't help. I see her everywhere now. In crowds, in windows, in mirrors. Always wearing my face, always smiling that wrong smile, always watching. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself staring at people the way she stared at me, noticing all the little details about how they move, how they exist in space. And I wonder, is this how it starts? Is this how you learn to watch like she does? The mall's still there, still open, still hiring night security. But sometimes, if you walk through the food court late at night, you might see a woman standing near the old Cinnabon. And if she turns to look at you, you might notice her face seems familiar, like someone you know but can't quite place. Just don't let her see you watching, because once she notices you, once she chooses you, she never really leaves. She just teaches you to watch like she watched me. Empty college campuses at night have their own kind of silence. It's not just quiet. It's like the buildings are holding their breath, waiting for morning to bring back the rush of students and life. Usually that silence was comforting, until someone started leaving notes on my patrol car that knew way too much about my life. I'd been working campus security for 3 years, mostly night shifts. The job was pretty straightforward. Drive around campus, check buildings, make sure doors were locked. Sometimes we'd get drunk students trying to break into the pool, or couples looking for somewhere private, but mostly it was just me and my thoughts. The first note appeared on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd just finished checking the science building when I noticed a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. At first I thought it was just another flyer, but when I pulled it out, my blood ran cold. Written in neat, precise handwriting were details about my daughter's soccer practice. Where she played, what position, even the color of her cleats. I stood there staring at the paper, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't told anyone at work about my daughter's soccer. It wasn't exactly break room conversation. I looked around the empty parking lot, but there was nothing except shadows and the distant glow of streetlights. The next night, another note. This time about my wife's job at the elementary school, including details about her classroom that only someone who'd been inside would know. The layout of her desk, the drawings her students had made for her, even the coffee mug she used every morning. I started varying my patrol routes, checking my mirrors more often, looking for anyone following me, but the campus was always empty, just dark buildings and empty walkways. Yet somehow the notes kept appearing. "Your son's doing better in math. That tutor on Thursdays is really helping. You should fix that loose shingle on your roof before the rain gets worse. Your mother called yesterday. You should call her back. She misses you." Each note revealed something more personal, more private. Things no stranger should know. I started taking photos of them, documenting times and locations, trying to establish some pattern. But they appeared randomly, sometimes when I was checking buildings, sometimes during my breaks, sometimes when I'd only turned my back for a few seconds. The security cameras were useless. They'd show my car sitting empty, then static for a split second, then the note would be there. No one approaching, no one leaving, like they materialized out of thin air. One night the note was different. No personal details, just 5 words that made my skin crawl. "I see you watching your family." I reported everything to my supervisor, showed him the notes, the photos, the camera footage. He increased patrols in my area, had IT check the cameras for tampering, even brought in local police. But they found nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, no evidence of who was leaving them. The notes got darker after that. Your daughter left her window open last night. Anyone could have gotten in. Your wife works late on Wednesdays. She should be more careful in the parking lot. Your son takes the same route to school every day. So predictable. They weren't just observations anymore. They were threats. Whoever was watching knew everything about my family's routines, their vulnerabilities, their moments alone. I started escorting my wife to and from her car, checking my kids' windows every night, changing up their routes to school. The anxiety was constant, crushing. Every shadow might hide someone watching. Every stranger might be the one leaving the notes. Then came the note that broke me. You can't protect them all the time, but I can watch them always. Attached was a photo of my family at dinner, taken through our kitchen window that same night. We were all there, smiling, unaware we were being watched. The angle meant someone had been standing in our backyard, right outside our house while we ate. I quit that night, packed up my family and moved across state, changed our phones, our routines, everything. Found a day job where nothing was hidden in shadows. But sometimes, even now, I'll find a note. On my new car, in my mailbox, under my door. They're different now. No threats, no warnings, just observations. Like whoever's watching wants me to know they followed us. That distance doesn't matter, that they'll always be there. Last week I found one in my jacket pocket, a pocket that had been empty that morning. All it said was, "Still watching." I don't work nights anymore. Can't stand the thought of being alone in the dark, knowing someone might be out there learning every detail of my life. But the worst part isn't the fear for myself. It's knowing that someone is still watching my family, collecting details about their lives, their habits, their moments of vulnerability. Because that's what they do. They watch, they learn, they remember. And somewhere out there in the shadows between streetlights or the spaces between houses, they're still watching, still learning, still leaving notes that prove no distance is far enough, no precaution is sufficient. I've installed security cameras, motion sensors, everything I can think of. But deep down, I know it won't help. Because whoever they are, they don't show up on cameras. They don't trigger alarms. They just watch and write and wait. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind. If maybe the stress of night shifts and an overactive imagination created this whole thing. But then I'll find another note, revealing some new detail about our lives. And I know it's real. The police can't help. What can they do about someone who leaves notes but never appears on camera? My wife thinks I'm paranoid, that I'm seeing threats where there are none. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am crazy. But I know what I've seen. I know what those notes contained. And I know that somewhere out there, someone is still watching, still learning, still writing down every detail of our lives. I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for weeks. I used to work the night shift at this small printing company. You know, one of those places that does business cards, flyers, that kind of stuff. I operated the printing press from midnight to 8 a.m. Nothing crazy ever happened there until about 3 weeks ago, and I still can't explain what I experienced that night. The place was pretty basic, just a big room with 2 printing presses, some computers for design work, and a storage area in the back. At night it was just me there, which was fine because I like working alone. The noise from the press kind of becomes white noise after a while, and I could just zone out and do my job. That night started normal enough. I was running a big order of business cards, just keeping an eye on the press to make sure everything was printing right. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something weird on one of the sheets coming out. At first I thought it was just a misprint or maybe some ink splatter, but when I looked closer, I realized there were these strange symbols mixed in with the text. They almost looked like letters, but not from any language I've ever seen. I figured maybe the file was corrupted or something, so I stopped the press and went to check the computer. But when I pulled up the original file, it was totally normal. Just regular business cards with normal text. I went back to check the printed sheets, and that's when I felt this weird sensation, like someone was standing right behind me. I turned around fast, but nobody was there. just the empty room and the hum of the fluorescent lights. But I swear I could feel someone watching me. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? Like that, but way more intense. I tried to shake it off and get back to work. I started the press up again, but now the weird symbols were showing up on every sheet. And they were different now. They were starting to form words. Normal English words. What really freaked me out was what they said. I know you hate Mondays. I know that sounds stupid, but here's the thing. I had just been complaining about Mondays to a coworker at lunch that day. No one else was around when we had that conversation. I stopped the press again, my hands shaking as I pulled out the sheets. More words started appearing. The coffee here is terrible, isn't it? Just like you said last week. I had said that. I'd been grumbling about the break room coffee just a few days ago, but only to myself. I hadn't told anyone else. At this point, I was seriously freaking out. I went to the storage room to get some fresh paper, thinking maybe there was something wrong with the batch I was using. The storage room was dark, the light switch is way in the back for some reason, so I used my phone's flashlight to see. That's when I noticed the laptop. There was this old laptop sitting on one of the paper crates, and it was on. The screen was showing lines of code or something, and as I watched, the symbols I'd seen on the print started appearing on the screen. Then I heard typing sounds, but nobody was at the keyboard. I got the hell out of there and went back to the press room. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone to try to call my supervisor. But before I could dial, the press started up by itself. Paper was feeding through, and words were appearing on every sheet. I've been watching you, learning how you work. You're so interesting when you think you're alone. I wanted to run, but I couldn't leave the press running like that. It would waste thousands of sheets of paper and probably jam up. So I went to shut it off, and that's when I saw him. There was a guy standing by the computer, but something was wrong about him. He was really thin, wearing dark clothes, and he moved in this weird way, like he was trying to copy how normal people move, but couldn't quite get it right. He looked at me and smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was like he had learned about smiling from reading about it in a book. When he spoke, his voice sounded almost robotic, like someone trying to imitate human speech. "The codes are beautiful, aren't they?" he said. "I've been studying them, studying you, learning how everything works." I backed away toward the door, but he moved so fast. 1 second he was by the computer, the next he was blocking my path. Up close, his face looked even more wrong. His eyes were too wide and they didn't blink. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "I just want to understand, want to learn how you think, how you move, how you exist in this space." I ran. I didn't care about the press anymore, didn't care about my job, just ran for the exit as fast as I could. Behind me, I could hear the press running at full speed, papers flying everywhere, and that weird typing sound from the laptop. When I got to my car, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I looked back at the building and saw him standing at the window, still smiling that wrong smile, watching me. I called my boss from my car and quit right there, told him to mail my last check. I know he probably thinks I'm crazy or was on drugs or something, but I know what I saw. The weirdest part? I drove past the place a few days ago during the day shift. Everything looked normal, just people working like nothing ever happened. But when I checked online, I found out that their computer system had a total meltdown that night. Every file was corrupted with weird symbols and all their backups were destroyed. I've got a new job now, working days at a copy shop. But sometimes when I'm running the machines, I'll see weird symbols start to appear on the prints. They disappear when I look closer, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when I'm on my computer at home, I'll see those same symbols flash across my screen for just a second. I still don't know what that thing was or what it wanted. Was it some kind of hacker? A ghost? Something else? All I know is, something was in that building with me that night. Something that had been watching me for who knows how long. And sometimes I get this feeling that it's still watching, still learning, still trying to understand how humans work. I know how crazy this all sounds, but I know what I experienced, and I'm never working another night shift again. I need to share what happened to me during my night shift at the animal clinic last month. I've been working with animals for over 6 years, and nothing like this has ever happened before. I still get chills thinking about it. I was working overnight at this small animal clinic just outside of town. It's a pretty basic setup. A few exam rooms, a surgery suite, and kennels in the back for the animals staying overnight. During night shifts, it's just me and whatever animals we're boarding or monitoring after surgery. The clinic sits kind of isolated, with just a gas station across the street that closes at 11. That night started normal enough. I had 3 dogs and 2 cats staying overnight, all routine stuff. Around midnight, I was doing paperwork when the phone rang. Working nights, you get used to emergency calls, usually people panicking about their pet vomiting or having diarrhea. But this call was different. When I answered, there was this weird silence, then heavy breathing. I almost hung up thinking it was a prank call, but then this man's voice came on. He sounded really agitated, saying his dog was bleeding badly and he needed help right away. I went into my usual routine, asking about the dog's symptoms and giving him directions to the clinic. That's when things got weird. He kept talking about the blood, but something was off about the way he described it. Like he was too specific about it, almost enjoying describing it. Then he just hung up. I figured he'd either take the dog to the emergency hospital in the city, or it wasn't as bad as he made it sound. About 20 minutes later, he called again. This time, he was talking about a cat with a broken leg. But he used the exact same tone, the same way of describing things, just with different injuries. I told him again how to get to the clinic, but he wasn't listening. He just kept describing the injuries in this really unsettling way. The calls kept coming every half hour or so. Each time it was a different animal with different injuries, but always described in that same disturbing way. And he never actually brought any animals in. Just called, described horrible injuries in vivid detail, then hung up. Around 2 a.m. he called again, but this time was different. He said, "I can see you sitting at the desk. That blue scrub top looks nice on you." I froze. I was wearing blue scrubs and I was sitting at the front desk. But the clinic was dark except for my desk light and the blinds were closed. There's no way anyone could see in from outside. I got up and checked all the doors again, making sure they were locked. When I looked out the front window, I couldn't see anyone, but the parking lot lights had gone out, which was weird because they're supposed to stay on all night. The phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but we're not supposed to ignore calls in case of real emergencies. When I picked up, he started describing my every movement from the last few minutes. How I'd gotten up to check the doors, how I'd looked out the window, even how my hands were shaking as I held the phone. I hung up and called the police. While I was talking to the dispatcher, I heard knocking at the back door, the one we use for staff only. Nobody but employees even knows about that door. The knocking got louder, more aggressive. Then it stopped suddenly and the phone rang again. "You don't need to call the police," he said. "I just want to help the animals. Let me in and I'll show you." His voice was different now, harder, angrier. In the background, I could hear what sounded like animals crying in pain, but something was off about the sounds. They didn't sound quite real. I stayed on the line with the police while I checked on the animals in the kennel. They were all agitated, barking and growling at the back door. Even the cats were hissing, their backs arched. The police said they were sending someone, but we're pretty far out of town, so it would take about 15 minutes. Those were the longest 15 minutes of my life. The phone kept ringing. When I didn't answer, he started leaving voicemails. Each one was just sounds of animals in pain, mixed with his breathing and this weird laughing. Between calls, I could hear him walking around outside the building, trying different doors, tapping on windows. At one point, he got really quiet, and I thought maybe he'd left. Then I heard his voice, not through the phone, but right outside the exam room window. "I know which animals are in there with you," he said. "I know their names, their breeds, why they're staying overnight. I've been watching. I've been here before." That really freaked me out because he started naming the animals. Not just what kind they were, but their actual names and why they were there. Information that was only in our computer system or written on their kennel cards. The only way he could know that is if he'd been inside the clinic before. The police finally arrived, but by then he was gone. They found weird scratches on the back door, like someone had been trying to pick the lock. And all the security cameras had gone dark around midnight, just static on the recordings. The really messed up part? When they checked the phone records, there were no incoming calls during that time period. Nothing, like the calls had never happened. But I still have the voicemails on my phone, the animal sounds, the breathing, his voice saying he can see me. I quit that night. Couldn't handle the thought of being alone there again. Found a day job at a regular vet's office where there's always other people around. But sometimes my phone will ring late at night, and when I answer, I just hear breathing and those not quite right animal sounds. The police never found him. Never figured out how he knew those details about the animals or how he disabled the cameras. The clinic installed a better security system and started having 2 people on night shift, but I still drive past sometimes and wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting to call someone else. I know this sounds crazy. If someone had told me this story before it happened, I wouldn't have believed them. But I know what I experienced. I know what I heard in those calls, and I know someone was watching me that night. Someone who knew way too much about what went on in that clinic. Sometimes I wonder if he ever actually had any injured animals, or if he just used that as an excuse to watch, to learn our routines, to figure out when someone would be alone. I still work with animals, but never alone, and never at night. Can't handle the thought of answering a phone in an empty building anymore. And sometimes when I'm working at my new job, I'll catch a glimpse of someone watching through the windows. Just for a second, then they're gone. And my phone will ring, but when I answer, there's just silence and that familiar breathing. I really need to get this off my chest. I worked as a lighthouse keeper for about 2 years, and what happened during my last shift still keeps me up at night. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear every word of this is true. The lighthouse was pretty isolated, sitting on a rocky point about 5 miles from the nearest town. It wasn't a tourist attraction or anything, just a functional lighthouse that needed someone to maintain the equipment and make sure everything ran properly. Most nights were peaceful, just me and the sound of waves hitting the rocks below. That night started like any other. I was doing my regular checks around 11 p.m. when I noticed a small boat tied up at the dock at the base of the cliff. This wasn't completely unusual. Sometimes fishing boats would stop to rest or wait out bad weather. But this boat was different. It was empty. No fishing gear, no supplies, nothing. Just this beaten-up old boat bobbing in the water. I radioed the Coast Guard to report it, but they said they hadn't heard of any boats in distress. They told me to keep an eye on it and let them know if anyone showed up to claim it. I figured maybe someone's boat had broken loose and drifted over, so I went back up to continue my rounds. Around midnight, I started hearing weird noises from the lower levels of the lighthouse. Not the usual creaks and groans of an old building. These were different. Like someone moving around but trying to be quiet about it. I went to check it out, but every time I got to where I thought the sounds were coming from, they'd stop, then start up somewhere else. I know how this sounds, but I swear someone was playing games with me. They'd make noise in one room, and by the time I got there, I'd hear something from upstairs. When I went up, the sounds would move down. This went on for maybe an hour, and I was getting seriously freaked out. Then I found my stuff had been moved around. Not like someone had broken in to steal things. More like someone had been looking through everything, studying it. My coffee mug was in a different place. My logbook had been moved to a different shelf. My jacket was hanging on a different hook. Little things that you might not notice if you weren't the only person who lived there. I locked myself in the lantern room. That's the room at the very top with the light equipment. It's the most secure room in the lighthouse, and I had the only key. I tried calling for help on my phone, but there's never been good reception out there. The radio was downstairs, and there was no way I was going back down there. That's when I heard footsteps coming up the spiral staircase. Slow, deliberate steps, like whoever it was wanted me to hear them coming. They stopped right outside the door, and I heard this weird scratching sound, like someone running their fingernails across the metal. Then they started talking. Not yelling or threatening, just talking in this calm, quiet voice about everything they'd found in my living quarters. They described my family photos, the book I was reading, what I'd had for dinner. Details only someone who'd been in my private space would know. I was terrified. The nearest help was miles away, and someone who had been watching me, learning my routines, was right outside that door. I asked them what they wanted, and they just laughed, this weird, echoing laugh that didn't sound quite right. They said they'd been living in the lighthouse for weeks, watching me, learning about me. They knew when I slept, when I ate, when I did my rounds. They'd been going through my things when I was busy with the light, reading my personal notes, even wearing my clothes sometimes. I could see their shadow under the door, and it looked wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that didn't seem natural. They kept talking, telling me things about myself that nobody else could know, private things I'd written in my journal, conversations I'd had on the phone when I thought I was alone. The really messed up part? They knew about stuff that had happened earlier that day. Like they said, "That ham sandwich you made for lunch was a bit dry, wasn't it? You should have added more mayonnaise." They were right. I had made a ham sandwich for lunch and it was dry, which meant they had been watching me that same day. Around 3 a.m. the boat disappeared. I was still locked in the lantern room, watching it through the windows, when suddenly it was just gone. No sound of an engine starting, no one untying it. It just vanished. The footsteps outside my door stopped too, and everything went quiet except for the waves. I stayed locked in that room until sunrise. When I finally got the courage to come out, I found things in the lighthouse had been moved around even more. Furniture was in different positions, pictures were hanging crooked, and my stuff was scattered everywhere like someone had been examining it all. But the worst thing I found was in my bedroom. All my clothes had been taken out of the closet and laid on the bed in this perfect circle. In the middle was my journal, open to a page where I'd written about how lonely it gets in the lighthouse sometimes. And underneath my handwriting, in this weird, shaky script, they'd written, "You're never alone here. I'm always watching." I quit that day, called my supervisor and told him I was done. He probably thought I was crazy or on drugs or something. The Coast Guard investigated but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been there except me. The security cameras didn't show anything either, just static during the times when all this was happening. I got a new job in the city as far from the ocean as I could get. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps coming upstairs that don't exist in my apartment. And sometimes I'll come home to find my things moved slightly, not enough to prove anything, just enough to let me know that whatever was in that lighthouse might have followed me home. I know how insane this all sounds. I've never told anyone else because who would believe me? But I know what happened that night. I know someone or something had been living in that lighthouse with me, watching me, learning about me. And sometimes I wonder if they're still there, watching the new keeper, or if they're somewhere closer still watching me. The lighthouse is still operating. They hired someone new to replace me. Sometimes I think about warning them, telling them to check the empty rooms and dark corners. But what would I say? Watch out for the thing that lives in the lighthouse and likes to go through your stuff? They'd think I was nuts. All I know is I'm never working nights again, especially not anywhere isolated. And I always triple check my doors and windows before bed, though deep down I know that whatever was in that lighthouse probably doesn't need doors to get in. I need to share something that happened during my night shift at the bus depot last month. I've worked there for 3 years, and nothing weird ever happened until that night. I still can't explain it, and I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe working nights again. I was doing my usual rounds at the depot. It's just a big parking lot with about 50 buses, a small office building, and some maintenance garages. Night shift is pretty quiet, just me making sure nobody breaks in or messes with the buses. I usually start my shift at 11 p.m. doing a walkthrough of the lot and checking that all the buses are locked. That night I noticed something odd on my car when I first got to work. There were these tiny handprints on my driver's side window. Not like a kid's handprints. These were way too small, like maybe a toddler's size, but the shape was wrong somehow. They were really dirty too, like someone had dipped their hands in mud before touching the glass. At first I figured maybe some kid had been playing in the lot during the day, though that seemed weird because we keep the gates locked. I wiped them off with some paper towels from the office and tried not to think about it, but something about those prints just felt off. They were too perfectly placed, all lined up in a row like somebody had deliberately put them there. Around midnight, I was doing my first round of the lot when I noticed more handprints, this time on one of the buses. Same size, same dirty marks, but now they were all over the windows on one side. It looked like someone had been trying to look inside, pressing their tiny hands against every window. But here's the thing. I had just checked that bus 20 minutes earlier, and there was nothing on it then. I radioed back to the office to check the security cameras, but they didn't show anything. Just empty space around the bus. The prints had appeared somehow without anyone showing up on camera. As the night went on, more handprints started appearing. Every time I'd check a section of the lot, I'd come back later to find new ones. Always the same size, always that same muddy look to them. They started showing up higher on the buses too, like whoever was making them could somehow reach the top windows. Around 2 a.m. I heard this weird scratching sound coming from inside one of the buses in the back of the lot. Not like metal on metal, more like fingernails on glass. When I went to check it out, the whole bus was covered in those handprints, even on the inside of the windows, but all the doors were still locked, and the alarm system hadn't gone off. I'm not afraid to admit I was seriously freaking out by this point. I did another check of the cameras, but they kept showing static whenever I tried to view the areas where the prints were appearing. The maintenance guys had just checked the system that morning, so I knew it wasn't a technical problem. Then I started hearing noises from different buses, that same scratching sound, moving from one to another, like something was going around touching all of them. But every time I'd go to check, there'd just be more handprints and no sign of whoever was making them. The worst part came around 3 a.m. I was in the office trying to call my supervisor when I heard something moving outside, not just scratching this time, but like small feet running across the gravel. I looked out the window and saw something dart between two buses. Just a shadow, but it was small, maybe 3 feet tall, and it wasn't moving right. The way it ran was all wrong, like its joints were bent the wrong way. I watched it through the window, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. It stopped next to my car and just stared at the office. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking right at me. Then it reached out and touched my car window again, leaving another one of those tiny handprints. The security lights started going out one by one, like something was moving through the lot, turning them off. Not breaking them, they just went dark as this thing passed by. Soon the only light left was the one right outside the office. That's when I heard something climb onto the roof of the office. Small footsteps moving around above my head, then that scratching sound right above me. I could see more handprints appearing on the office windows, starting at the bottom and moving up, like something was climbing down the glass. I grabbed my keys and ran. Didn't even bother locking up, just ran to my car. The whole way there I could hear whatever it was following me, those quick little footsteps on the gravel. I got in my car and looked in the rearview mirror, and that's when I finally saw it clearly in my headlights. It was small like a child, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, bent at odd angles, and its hands were tiny, but had too many fingers. It was covered in what looked like mud or dirt, and it moved in this jerky, unnatural way. When it saw me looking, it smiled, this huge, wrong smile with too many teeth. I got out of there as fast as I could, called my supervisor from home and quit right there. Told him to mail my last check. He probably thinks I'm crazy, but I don't care. I drive by the depot sometimes during the day, and it looks normal. But at night, I can sometimes see those little handprints on the buses, glowing faintly in the security lights. The really messed up thing? After I quit, I found out that other people who'd worked nights there had seen weird things too. Nobody had ever stayed more than a few months on night shift. They never said exactly what made them quit, but a few of them mentioned handprints. I've got a new job now, working days at a warehouse. But sometimes when I go to my car in the morning, I'll find those same tiny handprints on my windows. They're always fresh, like whatever was at the depot followed me home. I keep trying to convince myself it was all in my head, But then I'll hear that scratching sound outside my bedroom window at night. And I know whatever was there that night is still out there, still watching, still leaving its marks. I know how crazy this all sounds, but I know what I saw that night. And I know those handprints were real. I've got pictures on my phone, though they never come out clear, always blurry or distorted somehow. I don't work nights anymore, and I always park my car in a garage. But sometimes, when it rains and the ground gets muddy, I'll find those little handprints on my windows again, like a reminder that whatever was at the depot hasn't forgotten about me. I've been trying to make sense of what happened during my last night cleaning the office building, and I still can't explain it. I worked there as a night janitor for about 6 months, and everything was normal until that night. I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for weeks. The building was one of those typical corporate places, 12 floors of cubicles and conference rooms. During the day it was full of people, but at night it was just me with my cleaning cart, going floor by floor. I actually liked how quiet it was, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the sound of the vacuum cleaner. That night started like any other. I got in around 11 p.m. and started on the ground floor like usual. Everything was fine until I got to the 4th floor. I was restocking paper towels in the bathroom when I heard whispers coming from somewhere nearby. Not like the usual building noises, these were actual voices like people having a conversation, but I couldn't make out the words. I figured maybe some people were working late, though that was weird because I hadn't seen any cars in the lot except mine. When I went to check the offices near the bathroom, they were all empty and dark, but I could still hear the whispers like they were coming from the walls. The really freaky part was when I went back to my cleaning cart. All my supplies had been rearranged. Not like they'd fallen over. Everything had been taken out and put back in a different order. The bottles were all facing the same direction, and the cleaning rags were folded in perfect squares. I know it sounds stupid, but I'm really particular about how I organize my cart, and this was definitely not how I left it. I tried to tell myself maybe I'd done it without thinking, but deep down I knew I hadn't. The whispers were getting louder now, and they seemed to be coming from different directions. Sometimes they sounded like they were right behind me. Then they'd suddenly be coming from down the hall or above me. Around midnight, things got even weirder. I was vacuuming the main office area when I noticed all the desk items on one row of cubicles had been lined up perfectly straight, like someone had measured the spaces between them. I'm talking pens, staplers, even the little post-it notes. Everything was arranged in these perfect geometric patterns. But I had just cleaned that area maybe 20 minutes before, and everything was normal then. I started really paying attention to my surroundings after that. Every time I'd leave a room and come back, things would be slightly different. Papers that were in messy piles would be stacked neatly. Chairs that were pushed in would be pulled out. Trash cans that I'd just emptied would be full again, but not with normal trash. Just pieces of paper folded into identical squares. The whispers kept getting closer, and now I could almost make out words. They sounded like they were talking about me, describing what I was doing. He's cleaning the windows now. He missed a spot on the floor. His heart rate is elevated. That last one really freaked me out because I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Around 1 a.m. I was cleaning one of the executive offices when all the lights on the floor went out at once. Not like a power outage. They turned off one by one like someone was hitting switches. But I knew all the switches were near me, and I hadn't touched them. I used my phone's flashlight to find my way back to the utility closet where we keep the circuit breakers. But when I got there, all the breakers were still on. While I was checking them, I heard what sounded like dozens of people whispering right outside the closet door. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, but every single piece of paper on every desk had been folded into one of those perfect squares. My cart was at the other end of the hall now, even though I'd left it by the executive office. When I got to it, all my supplies had been arranged again, but this time they were stacked in this weird spiral pattern. The whispers were all around me now, overlapping each other. He's scared. His pupils are dilated. His hands are shaking. They were right. I was terrified. I decided to get out of there and come back in the morning when it was light out. But when I tried to leave, the elevator wouldn't work. The buttons just flashed in this weird pattern when I pressed them. I headed for the stairs instead, but the door was ice cold when I touched it, like it had been in a freezer. That's when I heard footsteps above me. Lots of them, like a crowd of people walking in perfect sync. They were getting closer, moving down floor by floor. But the sound was wrong somehow. The steps were too precise, too rhythmic, like a machine trying to imitate human walking. I ran. I don't care how crazy it sounds. I just ran down all 12 flights of stairs as fast as I could. The whole time I could hear those footsteps following me, keeping pace but never getting closer or further away. The whispers followed too, getting more excited. He's running. His adrenaline levels are increasing. This is fascinating. I made it to my car somehow and got out of there. The whole time I was driving home, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Sure, I was going to see something following me. When I got home, I found all my cleaning rags in my pockets folded into those same perfect squares, even though I know I'd left everything back at the building. I quit the next day, sent an email to my supervisor and told him to mail my last check. He probably thinks I'm crazy or was on drugs or something, but I know what I experienced. When they hired my replacement, I thought about warning them, but what would I say? Watch out for the whispers that rearrange your cleaning supplies. The weird thing is, nothing like this ever happened during the day. I went back once during business hours to pick up my last check. Everything looked normal, just people working in their cubicles, living their normal lives. But when I walked past that utility closet on the 4th floor, I swear I could hear faint whispers coming from behind the door. I've got a new job now, cleaning at a small gym during the day. But sometimes when I'm alone, I'll hear those whispers start up again. And every now and then I'll turn my back on my cleaning supplies for just a second, and when I look back, everything will be arranged in those perfect geometric patterns. I don't know what was in that building. I don't know if it's still there, watching the new night janitor and studying their movements. All I know is something was there that night, something that watched and measured and whispered. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I'll find pieces of paper in my house folded into perfect squares, even though I know I didn't put them there. I need to share what happened during my last night working at the pharmacy because it's been haunting me for weeks. I worked there for almost a year on the overnight shift, and while weird stuff happens sometimes, it always does when you work nights. This was different. This was something I still can't explain. The pharmacy was one of those small, independent ones, not a big chain. Just a regular neighborhood place that stayed open 24/7 for emergencies. Night shift was usually pretty quiet, mostly just people picking up late prescriptions or getting cold medicine. That night started normal enough until he came in. It was around 2 a.m. when he first walked through the door. I remember looking up from restocking the shelves and immediately feeling something was off about him. He was tall, kind of scraggly looking, wearing this worn-out jacket even though it was pretty warm out. But it was his eyes that really got to me. They had this intense, almost hungry look, like he was taking in every detail of the store and me. He walked straight to the cold medicine aisle, grabbed a box of NyQuil, and came to the counter. I rang him up, trying to be professional even though something about him was making my skin crawl. He didn't say much, just stared at me the whole time with those weird eyes. When I handed him his change, his fingers were ice cold. I figured that was it, just another weird late-night customer. But he came back the next hour. Same thing. Walked in, grabbed NyQuil, paid without saying much. This time, though, he knew my name. He said, "Thanks, Sarah," even though I wasn't wearing my name tag. I never wear it on night shift. He kept coming back every hour, on the hour. Each time he'd buy the same thing, but he started saying more. He knew things about me he shouldn't have known. Like he mentioned the book I was reading on my break, but I only read it in the back room where customers can't see. He knew about the coffee shop where I stopped before work, even knew my usual order. Around 5 a.m., I was seriously freaked out. He'd been in 6 times already, and each visit he revealed more things he somehow knew about my life. My cat's name, where I went to high school, the fact that I'd just broken up with my boyfriend, things I'd never told anyone at work. The 7th time he came in, he didn't even pretend to buy anything, just walked straight to the counter and started telling me about my apartment, the color of my bedroom walls, the pictures I had hanging in my living room, even the brand of cereal in my kitchen. He described everything perfectly, right down to the pile of laundry I'd left on my bedroom floor that morning. I was shaking at this point. There was no way he could know these things unless he'd been in my apartment, been watching me. I tried to keep my voice steady, as I told him he needed to leave or I'd call the police. He just smiled, this weird, empty smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I like watching you, Sarah," he said. "You're so interesting when you think you're alone. Like how you talk to yourself when you're cooking, or how you always check your closet before bed." I grabbed my phone to call the police, but he reached across the counter faster than I could move and grabbed my wrist. His hand was still ice cold, and his grip was way too strong. He kept smiling that empty smile as he told me more details about my daily routine. When I wake up, what bus I take to work, which path I take when I walk my cat. I managed to pull away and ran to the back office, locking the door behind me. Through the security camera, I could see him still standing at the counter, just staring at the office door. He stayed there for what felt like hours, not moving, barely blinking, just staring. When my morning replacement arrived at 8 a.m., he was gone. I quit that day. Couldn't handle the thought of working another night shift, wondering if he'd come back. I found a day job at a coffee shop across town and tried to forget about it. But here's the really messed up part. I still see him sometimes. Not at the pharmacy, but in random places. He'll be standing across the street when I get home from work, or sitting in his car outside my favorite restaurant. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of him in store windows or mirrors, always watching with those intense eyes. I changed my routines, switched up my schedule, even moved to a new apartment. But somehow he always finds me. I'll come home to find things slightly moved in my apartment. Not like someone broke in to steal stuff, but like someone had been studying my things. My books will be arranged in a different order, or my clothes will be folded differently. The worst part is the NyQuil bottles. I'll find them in weird places, on my kitchen counter, in my car, on my desk at work. Always the same brand he bought that night, always unopened. It's like he's letting me know he's still watching, still learning every detail of my life. I know how crazy this all sounds. If someone had told me this story before it happened, I would have thought they were making it up. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw in those eyes. This intense, inhuman curiosity, like I was some kind of specimen he was studying. I went to the police, but what could they do? He hasn't technically done anything illegal, just bought some cold medicine and talked about things he shouldn't know. They took a report, but told me there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I'll find another NyQuil bottle, or catch a glimpse of that worn jacket disappearing around a corner, and I know it was real. He's still out there, still watching, still learning every detail of my life. I don't work nights anymore. Can't handle being alone in empty stores or quiet streets. But even in broad daylight, surrounded by people, I'll sometimes feel those eyes on me. And I know he's there somewhere, watching, waiting, learning. Last week I found a note in my mailbox. All it said was, "You changed your shampoo. I liked the old one better." I moved again the next day, but I know it won't help. He'll find me. He always does.